When the warmth of its sound touched me, it made me feel at home. I had traveled, seen many things, and gone so far away from the world that I knew before, but that light brush of the concert band sounds beckoning me back into a place in which I felt safe. It felt as though my youth had found a snug chamber to hide within my heart. By watching Hibike Euphonium, I could always revisit that kind, nurturing place that made me into the person I would want to grow up to be. In high school, the wind ensemble was easily the thing that made the entire experience for me. As an ignorant teenager, I went into my freshman year with a very narrow view of the world, but having experiences of meeting so many people through ensemble in pursuit of art that we created with our blood, sweat, and tears, it started to open up more and more with each passing day. I was fortunate to go to a school with a very competitive and acclaimed music program directed by one of the best men I ever had the pleasure of bonding with. Not every day in band was exactly good, but it's unbelievable that I could say that both my most miserable and my most hopeful days spawned from this activity. My experience is not universal, but it is my own, and band is something that legitimately changed my life for the better and self-actualized me into the adult I strive to be today. All that in mind, Hibike Euphonium feels like an anime made specially for me, jam-packed with so much love and care that it feels like I'm watching a home video of my own life playing before my eyes sometimes. It is my favorite anime, favorite TV show, favorite work of fiction even perhaps, and I don't see anything ever touching it. Maybe not the most objectively well made, it does have a couple of flaws here and there, but in terms of personal impact and my own relationship with it, nothing has resonated with me more than this story of high school girls growing into their own people through an activity that I also hold a special love for. I think Kyoto Animation really didn't have to go this hard on this show for it to be successful. They could have just done K-On! Again with wind ensemble instruments, and it still would have turned back a profit. Hell, this show could have just been a super in-depth look at this one niche hobby, which is something a lot of anime do, and I still would have loved it. Hibike does not settle for that alone, though. Hibike tells a story that not only exposes the viewer to the world and philosophy of music and wind ensemble, it does this while painstakingly interweaving it with some of the most human characters that any anime has ever seen. The problems these girls face are things that any person might find themselves struggling with in some fashion or another. These are characters who live and breathe and move like we all do. These are people who develop in real time and sometimes in a non-linear fashion. These characters are so beloved by me, and I want to celebrate the level of subtext that each one carries with them, and the story they all represent. I don't think many anime deserve their high school setting. So many forget what it's exactly like to be a high schooler. Teenagers are complicated. They don't understand themselves, much less anyone else. Anime with high school age characters end up feeling like adults in teenage bodies because adults who write them don't properly put them in the right mindset of being absolute disasters trying to figure every little thing out. Hibike excels at it though. These are characters who are flawed in so many ways, but each comes from a place of sincere logic, and as they begin to understand how their flaws have manifested through their interactions with this activity and others, we see them change both in the foreground and the background. They have so much nuance that I could ramble about each one for an endless amount of time. So, I will. I'm going to rank every major Hibike Euphonium character from the most lackluster to the most three-dimensional and colorful. And I'll say it right now, this is a really positive list. Some of these characters I cannot comprehend how in-depth the brainstorming process must have been for them, and how much the crew needed to work to demonstrate every facet of them through staging, music, dialogue, character animation, and any other artistic device that the studio had to work with. It's fitting a show about music, and often wordless art, would demonstrate such unbelievable care and detail in exploring the world each one of them sees through their eyes without directly needing to tell us. Time to set some ground rules. For one, I'm not going to be ranking every single character. This video is going to be long enough as it is. I would literally die if I had to talk about Kyoko Mihara, second flute, who had a very deep and interesting arc that kickstarts when she's called out by Taki-sensei that one time in episode 4. Instead, I picked the 27 most major ones, the ones who seem like an irreplaceable part of the Hibike experience to me. Chihiro and Asumi Tanaka will be talked about in the Taki and Asuka sections respectively because their agency as characters exist for the sake of those two. Second of all, Liz and the Bluebird and Oath's finale are absolutely fair game. They are part of the anime's canon and the overall story. I'll be factoring them in too, as well as characters exclusive to them. However, do keep in mind that Oath's finale is the newest Hibike entry as of this video being posted, so if you're watching this in the future and are outraged why I didn't mention that one time Sapphire socked Kumiko in the face in their third year, I apologize. The novels, though, are specifically not a factor. They're different enough from the series that I kind of consider them unfair to compare. Yes, the anime is an adaptation, but it's also its own beast in many ways, with a lot of added content and storytelling that takes advantage of its visual and auditory components. There's no telling how other things may differ or even diverge in future entries in the anime's canon, so I'm just gonna leave them out of this. Third, and this is a big one, ships stay at the door. It's no secret that Hibike is gay as hell, and there's a lot of ships, the canonicity of which is heavily debated and stirs up some emotions in people, me included. I'll be upfront with my biases at least and say that I ship Kumire to a diehard extent. It is one of my favorite ships and it makes me happy, but romance or lack thereof is not why these characters are so special. These characters are complex and interesting without any of that. They don't need romance to define their personal journeys. It's always deeper and more interesting than that. As such, non-canon ships are a non-factor in this ranking. Last thing, I toyed with the idea of making this an objective ranking, but decided that was silly. Objective rankings do not exist. It is best to make peace with that now. Personal biases are in full force here. Just know that one man's opinion on the internet does not affect your day at all. Different characters are special to different people for different reasons. I celebrate your opinion being different than mine. I'll talk about it with you and cherish that you have a different experience. Just keep your head on your shoulders is all I ask. Alright then, let's begin. Okay, this might be my favorite anime of all time, and I wish for nothing more than to be able to sit here and tell you that every character in the show is at least passable, but no, Shuichi cannot be forgiven so easily. Okay, he's not a bad kid or anything, but his existence in the series just isn't meaningful or artistic or, well, good. He's the only character in the series I can confidently say takes away from the experience in some way. There's far worse characters out there, but this guy is just so disappointing because we were on the verge of greatness. We were this close! Had he gotten the same love and attention as the rest of the major characters, I could confidently say that there are no bad characters in Hibike. Unfortunately, there is one, and he comes in the form of this trombone player who canonically does not pay his dues on time, which is hilarious. Okay, so what do I not like about Shu? Well, he suffers from an embarrassing lack of focus, but unlike other characters, the show gives him credit for what he doesn't really deserve in spite of that. This man has no thoughts or ambitions of his own. Every time he shows up on screen, it feels like he either bitches at Kumiko for no reason other than to be a tsundere, or say something blatantly obvious to her that she already knows. His arc, or if you can even call it that, is that he struggles with a passage a couple of times, and then later interrupts what's supposed to be Kumiko's character-defining scene to interject about how he wants to improve. Well, does he improve? Who knows? They never show it. That would require devoting time to this character, and the show just has no interest in convincing us that there's anything going on in this guy's mind other than secretly liking Kumiko. He is a satellite love interest in the worst way imaginable. I was floored when Aoi left the band and he had nothing to say about it. He was just as much her childhood friend as Kumiko was, and he doesn't give a damn. All he gives a damn about, at least from everything the show presents us with, is getting with Kumiko, and he's not even very good at that. Kumiko and Shuichi have zero chemistry. Their interactions are almost entirely jabbing at each other with next to no sincerity behind their words. I don't like the notion that two people who are nothing but bitchy to each other would make a cute couple. No, good romance needs to come from some genuine basis in my eyes, and there is nothing here. Look at the scene where Shuichi invites Kumiko to the Agata Festival. She just sits there and shows next to no interest whatsoever. Her dialogue is so flat, so dismissive, not even flustered a tiny bit, showing that there may be something hiding under all that. If this is supposed to show that Kumiko has any romantic interest in this guy, KyoAni did a terrible job of conveying it, which just isn't like them. They especially know the importance of vivid expression and character animation in telling stories. This girl just isn't having this dude. I mean, can you blame her? Why would she like this guy? The only thing Shuichi ever does for Kumiko that's actually considerate is get her a hairpin for her birthday. And even he admitted straight out that he had to ask Midori what to get her because he has just that little investment in her to actually put some thought into what she might like. You cannot tell me that he couldn't have dreamt up anything on his own that was more personal to her than a basic flower hairpin. This is supposed to be her childhood friend. Shu here is the reason I had to emphasize shipping isn't a factor in this ranking, because some people are going to call me out saying that I was already biased against Shuichi from the start because of Kumire and him being a rival love interest. That's just not the case though. I really wanted to like Shuichi, and I really wanted to put aside my own ship to like his relationship with Kumiko in O's finale. It's just not good though. He's just not a good character. They spend no time on him whatsoever other than his shallow crush on Kumiko. Hell, I don't even know why he likes her other than being her childhood friend. Sincerely, he acts like more of an ordinary human being around Hazuki than Kumiko. I wish they developed that relationship more. Her liking Shuichi feels so much more sincere because he's a genuinely good guy around her and helps her out and talks to her without getting all bitchy. You can see that the things he does for her legitimately hold meaning to her. I wish I got to see more of the Shuichi we see around Hazuki because that's the only semblance of likability I ever saw from him in this show. I was really holding out for O's finale to somehow give this guy the arc that he's been so desperately needing and finally change my mind, and well, he just didn't get it. Even after they start dating, Kumiko and Shuichi's dynamic is the same as ever. It's not loving, it's not deep or meaningful, and it feels so hopelessly one-sided here, especially to the point that Kumiko straight up runs away from him trying to kiss her after they had been dating for months. Look at how far apart they sit from each other after they start dating. They don't even last until the end of the movie. That's how incompatible they are as people. Keep in mind that his only purpose in this movie is to be Kumiko's boyfriend, and he still doesn't have any dreams or ambitions of his own. He never had those in the first place, let alone now. It didn't have to be that way, though. We see again how much of a normal human being he acts like around his underclassmen when he's joking around with funny trombone noises, and that makes it all the more frustrating when he just chucks all this likability out the window around the only person he's really allowed to interact with in this series. Okay, I've shit on Shuichi enough. I'm ready to start talking about characters I actually like. Just know that I sincerely wanted Shuichi to be better than he was every step of the way. I don't have an agenda against him, it's just he never shows me any promise of being his own character, despite how important the show wants to make me believe he's come a long way and really earned the victories and shared in the sorrows that every other character so unquestionably does. At the most, we see hints of him having a personality, but it's sucked out of his brain the moment he gets within a 50-meter radius of Kumiko. Unless the third-year project finally does something interesting with him at last, he's going to need this tier of his own at the bottom of the Hibike hierarchy. From this point on, there is not a character I actively do not like. Some of the ones in this tier are somewhat uninteresting, but they don't take away anything from the story. Everyone in this tier ranges from neutral to decent, although they are the group of characters I have the least to say about. Yeah, Matsumoto exists. I think she probably has the most lacking presence of all of Hibike's mainstay cast, but unlike Shuichi, her presence doesn't actually take away anything. She just exists, this grumpy advisor who is sometimes seems sad talky, looking all gruff and strict-like. I think there was some potential with her that went unused as a sort of defrosting old woman who grows to appreciate the work the club puts in, like Mayuchi-sensei and Chihaifuru, but as she is, she's fine. She just exists, nothing more, nothing less. There's not really a point to her existence, considering Taki-sensei pretty much fills the advisor role perfectly and single-handedly, but I'm not going to complain about it really because she's just so harmless a presence in the show. I'll just move right along. No, I didn't think I'd put Riko so low on this list, but when I really sat down and made it, I had to think about what she actually contributes to anything or anyone in the series. I've always had a soft spot for her and Goto. I think they are hyper cute together, but just like Matsumoto-sensei, she's just kind of there. She doesn't really further anyone's development or have any sort of dream or ambition of her own. She just exists again. She's a little higher than Matsumoto-sensei to me because she can be endearing, but other than that, that's all there really is to say about her. From this point on, we've reached characters that I feel like at least have a positive impact on the story in some way. Azusa is probably the least of these characters, but she certainly has a role in the story that she fulfills well, even if it is exceedingly minor. If you removed Azusa from the story, I feel like something would be lost, unlike Riko or Matsumoto-sensei. Azusa is Kumiko's old friend from middle school. She serves as a perfect device for Kumiko to realize that she doesn't need to cling to the past anymore, and instead focus on her future with her new friends that she found at Kitauji's wind ensemble after working so hard with them to prepare for Sunfest. Each time Azusa reappears, it's sort of a reconfirmation that Kumiko is proud of how far she comes. This leads to some really nice character moments, even if Azusa herself is kind of a nothing character. I mean, they imply something is going on with her at one point, and I know the novels do go a little bit more into detail about what she's up to, but since those don't count on the list, Azusa stays right here at this perfectly respectable spot for what she is. Satsuki is like if Hazuki and Midori mutated together into this extreme moe blob. This is to say she's absolutely adorable and such a fun and cute new tuba to add to the section in No's finale. Out of the 4 new base members, she's the one with the least to her besides just being so darn cute and endearing to listen to. Her main purpose is to drive Nide, which I think is pretty well done. I cannot tell you much about what she herself wants other than be a friendly person and to have fun, but I'm excited to see what she might do in a third-year project or maybe a potential spin-off. As she is though, I'm glad she exists. She's pretty precious. Motomu is basically the same story as Satsuki. I like him a lot, but ultimately he's not really focused on Ino's finale, so I can't give him a ton of credit even if I really want to. For one, I think he's precious as well. The way he tries to act so mature despite being so innocent and soft is just so likable. I kinda like him and Midori as a duo. Seeing the standoffish boy get disgruntled by her purity is just a delight. I think he could have a great arc in a future season, and I see a lot of potential in his character to really take off if handled right. That's about all the good things I can say about him right now. It's just a shame he wasn't utilized as much in the movie because he's a really endearing kid. I almost didn't include Tomoe in this ranking, but the interesting thing about her, which makes her unique, is that despite having a presence comparable to all the other background characters in the series, with a line or two in Atsuki's episode at the end of Season 1, which is basically all she needed, she actually got a bit of focus in O's finale. I don't know if that's what the movie should have prioritized spending time on, considering how much they had to cram into it, but bottom line is we got a bit more focus on Tomoe, and it's fine. Now, when I was in marching band, this kind of thing was ridiculously common. There were so many injuries or conditions that would lead to someone being taken off the field for good, and it's just crushing. Tomoe suddenly having to drop trumpet because of a developing condition she can't help is especially brutal when it basically says no matter how hard she worked to play with everyone else at least once for her final year in high school, she just couldn't. There are some more characters we'll be talking about failures later in the list, but I think Tomoe is a good example of how health isn't a constant and you never know when it might take away your dreams. That's a hard message to swallow and a somewhat depressing one, but it is absolutely not an unrealistic one. It plays into the themes of Oath's finale regarding failure really well, and it sets the stage well for Kumiko and Kanade's conflict and its ultimate resolution. Now, if only Tomoe was a character we actually follow more throughout the series, she might be higher. I feel like her moments in Oath's finale come a little bit out of nowhere, and we're more so told about the things she's going through rather than seeing them unfold in real time. She's fine and has a perfectly good role in the story in Oath's finale, but she on her own just isn't in the same league as the better characters in this series. She's just there, being decent. Now we're going to talk about some characters I actually really do sincerely like and remember well for the functions they serve. These characters don't just add to the story in some way, they meaningfully enhance it. They're not the deepest characters in the world, but I feel like something would be lost without them. Beginning our top 20, we have Goto. This guy is just so hard not to love if you ask me. He's this goofily awkward tuba player who doesn't have much to say, but you just want to applaud whenever he does say something. In the second episode, when he walked out after Asuka's grandiose speech and just told everyone that the tuba was heavy and doesn't get much solo parts, that was comedy gold. If you've ever been in a band, you know a Goto. Someone who's so done with life and constantly complain about how hard everything is, but still puts out the work and some sort of unexplainable sense of duty to it all. I think my favorite Goto moment is when Hazuki and the gang tried to ask him about what his philosophy towards the tuba was, and he responds in the most legendary way. The best thing about tuba, the nice thing about tuba, is that it doesn't have anything. It doesn't have anything going for it, but we try really hard. We try like mad. That's what's good about it. No, that's what's best about it. If you understand that, you're a great tuba player. I want to dissect this quote a little because I really think getting to the bottom of what this means is what shows us what kind of a person Goto is and what makes him just that awesome. Goto basically admits that the tuba on its own is nothing special, but you will never meet someone more committed to anything than a tuba player. A tuba player knows their instrument is trashed here, but puts up with it to build their character and be that rock-solid bass sound that the rest of the band needs. If you've ever played in a wind ensemble, the tubas and other low winds are often playing very simple rhythms underneath the fancy melodies that clarinets, flutes, and trumpets get to play. However, their sound resonates the most throughout the band, and because their parts are so simple, it gives the higher voices a place to listen towards both for tuning and for rhythm. In an ensemble setting, the function of the low voices is to literally hold the entire band on their shoulders. A great tuba player knows this. A great tuba player knows that the fulfillment of becoming great at their art is not for their own self-gratification at the end of the day, but for the good of the entire ensemble. It's a thankless job, but that's what makes playing the tuba so admirable. That embodies who Goto is in this series. He's not here to have his own huge story unfold before our eyes. He's here to carry his other friends to their own successes. Is he ever going to complain about it? Of course not. That's how selfless he really is. It really makes sense that he could win over a kind girl like Riko. Take note, Shuichi. You need to embody some Chad Goto energy before you're ready for a relationship. However, as much as I love him, I can't justify ranking him too high. He left a really strong impression with what time he had, but he doesn't get a lot of it. I think he'd be okay with not being remembered as a legend like most of the characters on this list, though. I think the fact that he can support his friends so well is more than enough for him. Okay, hear me out on this one. Sapphire, or Midori as she likes to be called, is painfully underused. Painfully. She could have been an amazing character. She sincerely could have. Despite being in damn near every episode, though, she just never actually was an amazing character. Only a really likable and endearing one. And that's okay. I think the anime really overstates exactly how important she is to the show, even giving her this really flashy title card in the first opening to make it seem like she's a main character, when her function is more that of an essential confidant, but not the crux or even the footnote in the story or the lessons learned from it. Now, this is one of my complaints with Shuichi too, because I also argue that the show gives him way too much credit for what he ultimately amounts to, but the difference between that guy and Midori is that Midori is just genuinely lovable and an awesome friend to both Hazuki and Kumiko. She has great chemistry with both, which is more than I could say for Shuichi. What's even more, she fills a role that other characters can't do with their problems as the resident Pollyanna. Most of the cast of this show is pretty sad or stressed or secretly stressed. Midori is not, though. She's a crutch that the others can rely on to base themselves back in reality when they're down on themselves. I think comedic relief has great potential to go wrong, but Midori's weird interjections about Tuba-kun are perfectly timed where they never feel like they're exactly taking away from a moment, and only serve to give the character something to laugh about for a second. I really like how she goes out of her way to believe in Hazuki, especially with regards to her crushing on Shuichi and how responsible she feels when it doesn't work out. That's a genuine human being right there who cares so much about her friend's happiness. It's almost like the negative outcomes don't actually register to her as legitimate possibilities, and while that's a bit of an immature mindset given the show's outlook on failure, she ultimately does show the importance of still encouraging people to do their best anyways, and to not give in to despairing feelings of things possibly not working out. I think the scene where Hazuki knocks some sense into her and reminds her just how important it is that she does those things with a good old karate chop to the head is a great moment. I think she's an important part of the heart of Hibike Euphonum, even if she can't compare to the masterfully written arcs of more important characters. There's no timeline where I'd be okay with her not being in the show. She's just a delight who spreads joy to everyone around her. Hashimoto is interesting because he serves a very similar function to Midori, but goes about it in a very unique way without actually taking up much screen time. First of all, I love how him and Niyama are integrated into the show because it's very true to life. My director in high school also played trombone, just like Taki-sensei, so something we used to do is have these separate percussion and woodwind instructors who knew the ins and outs of the instruments far better than the director come in. It's a nice detail, and beyond that, it's great to see them serve separate mentor functions to Taki as well. Hashimoto is like most percussion instructors I've worked with, in that they seem like total goofballs and even act like it when you first meet them, but when they open their mouths for critique, they give the honest and educated truth of the matter. Unlike Niyama, who is very gentle in criticism, and Taki, who is very scathing, Hashimoto is one of the most constructive people in the show and contributes so much to the emotional growth of Mizore on two separate occasions by telling her what she needed to hear. I think what puts Hashimoto this high for me, honestly, is the one scene where he talks to Kumiko by the bonfire at band camp. This is the moment where I really saw the humanity of this man come through. Kumiko is asking him about Taki's late wife, and he just starts crying with joy that he gets to watch his best friend smile again. That's a good man right there. He loves music, but he loves being there to support his friend's happiness even more. That one moment moves me considerably, and while there's dozens of moments like it in this amazing show, he's the first character on this list I've talked about to really get a moment like that. The biggest drawback to Hashimoto, sadly, is that none of the percussionists are even remotely focused on in this show, so we really don't get to see him interact much with students, which is a shame. I think seeing him get really close and personal with the section would have been a wonderful use of his character, but it just wasn't meant to be. So ultimately, he's underutilized, but he's still a really darn good person who I just love seeing in Taki's life. Coming right off the heels of our percussion director, we have our woodwind director, Miss Satomi Niyama. I have to say, I'm really fond of her. I think Niyama hits a lot of the same beats as Hashimoto in that she's very true to life for a woodwind instructor with how lax and supportive she is. My woodwind instructors weren't exactly young women like her, but they were softer spoken and tended to give the benefit of the doubt. Well, except for one of my private clarinet instructors, that dude tore me apart. But I digress. Niyama is great. She's so warm and lovely, like you could just run up to this woman and she'll brighten your day with a smile that could bring world peace. And yeah, the students don't exaggerate either, she's gorgeous. Aside from just being extremely pleasant in the series proper though, she admittedly does not serve all that much of a role. She doesn't get a big moment like Hashimoto, or much else other than exchanging simple pleasantries and again being a support pillar to Taki-sensei. All of this changed though when we get to Liz and the Bluebird, which her role is dramatically emphasized in. In the movie, Niyama represents an emotionally supportive side of teachers that I think is insanely important yet not often explored. I think some shows get close to doing this, but never quite go as far with it to the point where it really resonated with me. Taki does it a little in the show as well, but I think Niyama absolutely runs with it. Mizore is a girl who has a lot going on inside, and it's the job of the teacher to really nurture kids like these and support them when they need it most. I think going out of her way to recommend a future path for a girl who is so lost in a road of hazy, unfamiliar twists and turns is incredibly sweet and marks a teacher who sincerely wants to see her students succeed on the path that's best suited for them. And that scene near the end, good god, that scene near the end where she talks through the solo with Mizore is just so incredible. Call it personal emotion stepping in, but I just love that unconditional acceptance, that gentle reasoning through her anxious emotions from the perspective of someone who's been living life a lot longer than her. This scene would not work as well if it had been a classmate helping her figure out the meaning of the solo's narrative. I think it's really significant for someone who'd been watching over her like Niyama to be the one to really give her the push to let her soar. She's the kind of mentor I feel like every teacher should aspire to be. Many instructors and teachers focus a lot on hard results from their students, and there's a time and a place for that, but Niyama knows that good results come from a realized person, and she set out to set up Mizore to be the most successful version of herself who can go on and succeed wherever she wishes. This woman is just so amazing, and I would rank her even higher if I could justify that she's not really that present in the series proper. But I think the ideas behind her are just so worthy of recognition and so important. That's pretty much the end of the short analyses. I have a lot to say about every character going forward, which brings us to the next three characters, who might not have been the most present physically in the series, but made a really strong impression with the limited time given to them. Here, have an egg, senpai, 'cause you're cool. Some people have tried to attribute meaning to Ririka giving Nozomi an egg for no fucking reason, but as much as I think Liz and the Bluebird is rich with subtext, I legitimately think she's just a weirdo, and I love that. Now that we've gotten the egg in the room out of the way, let's talk about Ririka and her very organic presence in Liz and the Bluebird. It's going to be a little weird talking about her before I get the chance to ramble about Nozomi or Mizore, but I shall do my best. Ririka is absolutely perfect for this movie. I think the new students who entered during the second year of high school for Kumiko & Co. do a very good job of demonstrating the range of underclassmen who join from the perspective of the older students. She's a bright, hopeful young girl who is constantly pining for the admiration of her senior because she just respects her that much. Mizore might have some rather asocial tendencies, but Ririka still idolizes her. Mizore is the only veteran member of the double reeds, which I think is significant because someone who's new in an ensemble is going to look to those with more knowledge to make them feel more sure of themselves, and being one of the most skilled players definitely gives Mizore some qualities that a new member like Ririka would latch onto. Other sections, as shown by the glimpses of the flutes we get, have upperclassmen who are super eager to get involved and support the younger members both in and out of ensemble. However, things are a bit more awkward when we consider that Mizore has trouble forming attachments to people whose names aren't Nozomi. Mizore initially rejects Ririka's advances to gain her friendship. This isn't out of malice or anything. At this point in the movie, Mizore has a huge aversion to spreading her wings and allowing herself to get comfortable broadening her horizons. She feels like Ririka would never be satisfied with the person she is, convinced her presence will never be able to live up to Nozomi's seamless way of getting along with people. Ririka attributes this to a personal failing of her own, saying that she was afraid she might have gotten on her bad side to Nozomi. I think this is significant because it shows just how pure Ririka's intentions are trying to spend time with Mizore. There's no ulterior motive here, she just really respects her superior as a fellow oboist and wants to expand this relationship further than just sitting next to one another. Over the course of the movie, we see Ririka never relent or give up on Mizore, and the latter girl reluctantly obliging her more and more each time. On the one hand, Mizore is still burdened with her invasive thoughts that Ririka might just be doing this to pity her, and that she must like the idea of her superior rather than the person she actually is. On the other, she's starting to dismiss these notions, getting just a tiny bit more used to her. Then we get what I feel like is the best scene with Ririka. This is the second one of two of them together in the classroom. Ririka comes in like usual to pester Mizore and chats her up about her reed making. We see Mizore has let her guard down considerably around Ririka at this point, having grown used to her. She even offers to help teach Ririka how to make reeds. She's cautious, but not overly closed off now. Then, Ririka puts her head down and suddenly falls apart. This goofy, happy little freshman breaks down in front of Mizore and starts crying. Up until this point, as evidenced by her uncertainty when talking to Nozomi, Ririka had been keeping it together and trying to put on a face so that her superior would grow to like her. She wanted nothing more than to eventually succeed at that and finally be accepted by this figure she really admired. After failing the audition, though, after being told she's just not good enough at oboe, she just can't shake the idea that she failed in the eyes of Mizore. Keep in mind, Mizore is mostly known for her proficiency as a musician. The subtext as I interpret it suggests Ririka was convinced that the only way she could have achieved value in her section mate's eyes was to impress her with her skill. Moreover, Mizore was going to graduate next year. Ririka was not going to get a second chance at this. This is the look of the girl who feels like she irreparably let down the person she looked up to more than anything. I won't go super deep into what's going on in Mizore's head during this because there's another section of the video where that would be more appropriate, but I'll say that when Mizore decides to invite Ririka to the pool, it shows her that her superior finally understood what she was feeling inside. It shows her that Mizore would never be the kind of person who would reject her so harshly without good reason. Now that she knows how genuine Ririka's admiration and love for her was, she feels like she can accept her into her life so much easier. Even if Ririka never got the chance to perform on stage with Mizore, she would still be forever accepted by her as a person. The text that reads, "I love you, senpai," along with the picture of them at the pool, damn, that's great stuff. It warms my cold, dying heart. I honestly had Ririka in the tier below this before actually writing all of it out, but I had to move her up after realizing just how moving her presence is in this movie. She's likable and cute, a perfect device for Mizore, but also a heartfelt character in her own right. I will say, most of her point in this movie is to advance Mizore's arc, but I like that she had her own as well. I think any higher on this list would be overstating just how much Liz and the Bluebird actually focuses on her, which isn't much, but I want to say she was the happy little surprise of this list. Fitting in is hard. The most intimidating part of joining a club or organization is immediately having to start in the out-group from everyone else. Some people may find their way seamlessly into the in-group, but there are always those who felt left out on the rocks well into the year. Mireille is one of the latter kinds of students. I feel genuinely bad for this poor girl. I don't blame her for struggling at all to feel loved in a new space. People are hard and complicated. The worst part is she's a really talented tuba player. The challenge for her in O's finale, though, is that all the skill in the world never seemed to compare to the value in her mind to the way others valued charisma. After all, the rest of the lower brass section latches onto Satsuki with almost no trouble despite her being a worse player because she's far more of a people person than Mireille. Does this mean that the other members were intentionally trying to exclude Mireille? Well, I don't really think so. They all seem to make a huge effort to try and connect with her. Kumiko even goes aside to Kanade to talk about getting closer to Mireille because of how hard she's looking for an opening. So why is Mireille so resistant to these people if to be acknowledged and accepted is what she wants? Seems like somewhat of a conflict of interest on her part. Well, Mireille is adopting sort of an all-or-nothing philosophy to a situation like this, which is just as much realistic as it is sympathetic. Her personality is not immediately clicking with these people, the conversations they have aren't immediately engaging and endearing, so she opts to put up this wall around herself because it would be better to have everyone out of her life than to force them to put up with her and offer her pity. If she is the person that everyone has to look down on and baby in order to integrate her into the section, she'll never get the validation and respect as an equal she so desperately wants. Mireille is tired of pity and is tired of being baby when other people make looking like a functioning human being so easy. The flaw in that thinking, of course, is most people don't actually want to approach these situations like that. Kumiko and the gang genuinely want to get closer to Mirai, not out of pity, but because they actually want to treat her just as comfortably as Satsuki. The only reason it seems like pity to Mirai is because she's deluded herself into being so defensive about it, which in turn causes this endless loop of pushing others away in a self-destructive manner. When she runs off at Sunfest, she talks about how she wanted to come to Kitauji because she'd heard about everyone took bands seriously. She thought if people put more value into skill than likable personalities, she might be more accepted in a group where she feels as though she belongs. That was never the issue, though. The reason Mirai could never find that sort of thing was because she herself had to change to welcome people into her heart. A stiff world where people only recognize each other as people by the skill they have in their craft does not exist. There's a time and place for one skill to be a factor, but making friends is not one. Ironically, that would be just as shallow and exclusive as accepting people by their immediate charisma. If one wants to make connections, they have to be prepared to let others see the real them, no matter how awkward it may seem at first to do so. It takes work on Mirai's part to give others a chance to make it work, otherwise they'll just shut down before they even have a chance to try. After Kumiko gives her the idea to take it slow and help her start opening up by at the very least letting others call her Michan, things start to get rapidly better for her. We don't see much of her for the rest of the movie other than a really nice scene where she expresses eagerness to play with both Hazuki and Satsuki next year, but I would love to see where she ultimately ends up in a third-year project. I feel like the simple act of taking one brick of her wall down has allowed her to see a world that wants to be let into her. Climbing it may be daunting at first for some, but at least it's doable now. Mirai can be loved and valued for who she is. Aoi is an enigma of a character. I think the first time I watched Hibike, I didn't really understand or appreciate the function she serves in the story as well as I should have. They set her up as a childhood friend character, and unlike the other one, she actually has legitimately soft and genuine dialogue with Kumiko. They definitely talk like old friends, but the entire time something feels a little off. There's definitely something to be said about her voice actress or the character animation in this regard, because every time Aoi engages with someone, you feel like there's a million things running through her head that you can just see through the foggy stare in her eyes, but nothing clearly legible. Well, Aoi joined the concert band as a part of the class that was caught in the middle of the schism between the older members who just wanted the rewards of hard work without actually putting in any of the effort, and the younger members who were upset that those same students were single-handedly sabotaging their potential. Aoi believes that no matter what, there was nothing that was going to stop these people from regressing into their old ways of goofing off, not working hard, and pinning the blame on someone else for their failure. That's why she so boldly voted that they should focus more on having fun than competing. It would be the best for this group that has proven to her that they don't care if they actually want to be good so long as they can make good memories. Haruka, Kaori, and Asuka were also part of the same class as Aoi, but unlike Haruka and Kaori, who genuinely like to believe the best in people, she falls closer to the cynicism that Asuka displays about the situation, but lacks her own reason to tolerate it. While Asuka blocks out the external drama because she's more focused on herself, Aoi is never able to do the same. She wants more than anything to be validated that her frustratingly futile attempts to get the first years to quit were not her own fault. It was a problem with the people, human nature, to commit sloth and deter those who genuinely wanted to give their all for something more. The scene with her and Kumiko by the riverbed is great because her cryptic comments demonstrate exactly how cynical she is about how the year is going to go and how weirdly excited she seemed to be for it to ultimately all fall apart when the going got too tough for what she believed the ensemble could handle. I personally believe she was looking forward to that moment when she could tell everyone, haha, I told you so, and stick her nose up satisfied that she was right and that these people were just destined to disappoint. I really like the line when she says about 3 years going by fast. She warns Kumiko how careful she should be, knowing that her friend doesn't deserve to put up with any of that precious time wasted by people who don't care. Other people are hopeless, they're always going to let her down in the end. Remember this because I'm going to come back to this line later for another character, but for now let's focus on what becomes of Aoi. As time moves forward, Aoi unfortunately has to find that her strongly held cynicism was all a self-constructed farce made for the sake of her own validation. What ends up happening is even though the band starts to slip into sloth at first and butts heads with Taki-sensei and each other, they do eventually come together and start finding the motivation to work hard as a group with one another. By all accounts, things end up being different this year, and now Aoi has nowhere to hide from the sense of optimistic determination that was engulfing her broken mind and spirit. The thing Aoi never accounted for in her head was that humans were capable of learning from the past. Sometimes the same pitfalls can be avoided if there is genuine reflection and adaptation from the people of the present who are mindfully able to reflect. The change in leadership with Taki-sensei and Haruka at the helm genuinely made a difference. The band learned the hard way under them that they need to work for the things they wanted out of the activity they signed up for. After Sunfest, we see the result of this crushing miscalculation finally push her over the edge. She starts pushing herself more towards her studies, trying to distract herself from how painful being among all these hardworking people is for her until she just refuses to put up with it anymore. When Taki-sensei calls her out for not having her part well rehearsed, she quits on the spot and makes a huge show of doing it. She makes it out like college is her reasoning, but I don't think that's the majority of it, especially because of the fallout scene afterwards. As Haruka says, it's perfectly reasonable to be in the club and not participate in the competition if it's too much work. In retaliation, we see Aoi's true colors come out when she calls the band different than last year. Now that everyone proved to be serious about the competition and working hard, it's way too painful for her to be a part of it knowing that she gave up before it even began. She begins to wonder if she really had just not done enough to make the first year say, seeing how human nature could not be to blame. The only cure for this distress is for her to leave. In her eyes, the organization does not deserve someone like her. Someone who didn't believe in the potential they had. So she wishes Kumiko luck on her audition and exits stage left. The story of Aoi Saito is not the happiest one. She ends her time on the show in despairing thoughts before slowly setting out to live life best she can now that her high school memories would be tarnished with this experience. Were there things Aoi could have done differently? Hundreds, but I really like that it plays out how it does. It's so human in portrayal and shows that not everyone can muster the fortitude to overcome hard events in life. If it's any consolation, though, I feel like her story keeps going on in the background of Hibike's narrative, however limited a role it may be. Aoi can still be seen in future episodes, all the way up to Kitauji's Nationals performance. In this tiny shot, you can see she has an engaged expression on her face, bracing herself to hear the performance of the band she left. Even if she could not go the distance, it puts a bittersweet spin on her narrative to imagine that this shot exemplifies that she has found peace with the way things played out. That, in spite of everything, she can be happy that they made it all this way in the end. Aoi can be happy with being proven so terribly wrong about the nature of people. There is a distinct step up in character writing with these next set of characters, if you can even believe that considering how lengthy and in-depth some of the entries before this have gotten. These are characters that really drive home the big themes of Hibike and are honest-to-God really fantastic characters. These four would be the best characters in their own shows had there not been a level of ascendance not thought possible that Hibike achieves with its very best characters. Kanade also gets the distinction Aoi got in that the second she shows up on screen, you know something is up with this girl. Honestly, major props to her voice actress, Sora Amamiya, for absolutely giving the performance of her life out there. Despite being a pretty famous actress in the seiyuu circle, this is honestly my favorite performance I've seen from her. She gets to play a more subtle character, which is cool for a change when some of her biggest claims to fame are a little less than subtle. She's aided by some really good dialogue and really well done scenes to set her up as a character who really sells O's finale as a movie. I could talk a lot about this movie as a whole and how it makes a lot of missteps that aren't very typical for Hibike, but I also want to advocate that it still absolutely delivers the quintessential beats with the characters it does focus on. Kanade is one of the best parts of the movie, and I want to emphasize exactly why that was. Okay, first I should say, Kanade isn't a bad kid overall, even if her antics at the beginning will drive some people up a wall. A lot of hotshot freshman talent roll into this activity like this, completely ready to flex their skill on the upperclassmen in order not to be treated as a joke by them. I think she especially, while not justified in acting this arrogant, comes from a place where it's really understandable why she resents those who hold seniority over her and wants to be seen as someone legitimate by their standards. In middle school, she did a very similar thing to Kumiko by taking the place of an upperclassman who she was clearly better than, and everyone hated her for it. This is the first instance of this plot device coming up in this list, so I might as well talk about this now. In the wind ensemble world that these characters live in, the competitiveness and pettiness of auditions and placements and solos is not exaggerated even a little. We all have differing experiences, but having gone to a high school where getting into higher ensembles was legitimately competitive and students only had 4 years to make these higher ensembles so they could experience them, the vitriol we see in this show over them is something that I think is actually perfectly dramatized. Again, I can't speak to everyone's concert band experience, but this pettiness over the senior members being upstaged by underclassmen is very real. Are these teens handling it in an absolutely immature manner? Yeah, but I'm glad they do. That's how real teens handle these things. Anyways, back to Kanade. So, Kanade responds to this notion of feeling invalidated in her skill by going full hostile on Kumiko and the rest of the section. She makes it her first order of business to grill them and get an alibi when she shows up to make sure they're all on the same page about choosing by skill. She makes snide corrections to Natsuki even after Goto already gave her feedback. She has this really slimy, manipulative monologue she spews out to Mirai where she essentially tries to goad her into hating Satsuki for her superficial charm not matching her actual skill level. It's kind of terrifying just how much Mirai buys into it, too. If Kumiko didn't step in, Kanade might have gotten away with all this toxicity she was bringing to the concert band. After Kumiko foils her little plot with Mirai, we see sort of a shift in Kanade's character. This is where she starts to see that the superficialness of the band in her eyes can't be deterred so easily. A lot like Aoi, she wants to cling to this little reality of her ideal that no matter how much people say it's about skill and skill alone, that people will always default to their biases, and that she cannot be sure that people won't undermine her again if she were to dare to succeed. So she goes for this big gambit when the audition comes around. Kanade goes in and tries to throw the audition in a grand, spectacular way. Her plan now can be interpreted as having two main goals. First of all, and this is the more explicit goal that I'm certain she went in with, her wanting to expose the biases once and for all. If Natsuki beat her out, she would get due praise and have her glorious final year and all that, and Kanade would have full reign to point at that and to call it bias. The second goal, though, the one I don't think Kanade realized she had, is that she was afraid. Kanade was feeling genuine fear about beating out Natsuki, so she subconsciously wanted to reduce that chance to zero when she saw that the upperclassmen weren't faltered by her strong presence, and even Mirai came around to join their side. Kanade had great talent, and it is reasonable for someone who is talented to want recognition for it. However, what Kanade got in pursuit of that in the past was not respect. It was hatred. She was loathed. This frustrated her beyond belief. How could she succeed but still fail in the eyes of others? It was a paradox that she took to blame on society itself, and in all honesty, is she really so wrong for feeling that way? However, this just is not how things work at Kitauji. The trumpet solo incident definitely shook this school of that for good, and that's where the scene in the rain comes in. After being confronted by Natsuki, Kanade pushes back and holds on to her villainous former motives, trying to spit back at Natsuki to demonize her. When Natsuki starts to lay on the pressure though, threatening to withdraw, the latter motive starts to rush to her conscious thought and suddenly takes over her when she realizes what that would mean for her. If Natsuki withdrew because of her, then the reality of being hated would come true, no matter if she failed or passed. She's pushed into a corner, eventually exposing her true feelings and running away. Kumiko chases her down, and we get the whole story from Kanade about how trapped she feels in failing no matter how hard she works or what approach she takes or what she tries to do to gain the respect of others. The message that comes from this is extremely important and one of the core themes of Hibike. You can work hard for so many years and do everything right, but just never feel rewarded for it. So why do you bother? The answer is, everyone still bothers anyways. Life isn't always going to hand you your victories. You're never owed anything for putting in all the effort in the world by life. It's a sad truth, but a real one. People still try though. People work and work hard. No matter whether you fail or succeed, you still always gain more from trying than giving up. Even if nobody in the world will ever know it, working hard made you a better person, and that is something you will always know. Sometimes failing is good for us. It makes us want to grow even more. Then we become an even better person for it all. Trying is never a wasted effort. You should never have to apologize for giving it your all. Before I move on, I think I need to briefly mention the last scene in the movie. I have more to say about it in another character's entry, so I won't start dissecting it like crazy just yet, but I think the way this movie ends promises that things will get better for Kanade soon enough. If she takes Kumiko's advice, I think the toxicity will clear out of the river, and the water will soon be all the purer for it. Kaori, Kaori, Kaori. How I've been looking forward to setting the record straight about you. A lot of people are so harsh on you for no good reason at all. Don't worry though, because I'm going to clear your name once and for all. You're an incredible character. First of all, a little fun trivia about Kaori is that she's voiced by the John Ratzenberger of KyoAni, Minori Chihara. Well, not in every single one of their works, she is in a significant amount of them, and you may also recognize her as Yuki Nagato, Mitsuki Nase, or Erica Brown. As such, she has a very iconic voice that I think is perfect for someone so pure of heart yet soft-spoken as Kaori. And pure of heart she is. In fact, I think I'd even go so far as to say she's probably the most genuinely nice character in the entire cast. But while I think this could have been done poorly and lead to an overly perfect character that is worshipped without merit, I want to applaud Hibike for giving her realistic doubts and flaws that extremely kind and honest people tend to have. Kaori was around for the schism, and the big thing with her is that in her second year, there was not a trumpet player who could rival her in terms of skill, yet the upperclassmen took the parts anyways. It is shown that Kaori fought probably harder than anyone to get the first years not to quit, even to the point of resigning her own position she worked so hard for so that they could play in the competition. The result is that this incredibly sweet girl who earned her talent the honest way is essentially getting steamrolled by the people who abused that kindness to take the graces she should have been granted and rip them out of her hands for themselves. Rather than growing bitter about it, her immediate response was to keep allowing herself to take the fall and get crushed just to stop things from getting worse. I think the first years in this situation were a little bit more perceptive than Kaori anticipated they would be. This very act of apparent generosity on her part only demonstrates to them exactly why they need to quit. The system this band runs on, where the kind have to suffer while the greedy and selfish keep benefiting, was not a system that they wanted to keep supporting. Taking advantage of Kaori's goodwill would only further support a system where people like her would be walked all over. Of course, the values of the band began to change a lot in the following year, and as they pushed to be more competitive, Taki-sensei placed a greater value on skill for the auditions and the solo parts. So this means Kaori, the best trumpet player, has those solo parts on lock, right? She'll get to have her happy ending where it all just works out in a just system, right? Well, that might have happened if not for a certain young woman named Reina, the protege trumpet Kosaka. Kaori was about to be crushed by a system that might have helped her in the year prior, and this is where things get complicated and really frustrating for her. A lot of people wonder why Yuko was the one to throw a big fit about the audition results and not Kaori proper. If it's such a big deal for her to create such drama over, shouldn't Kaori be the one interjecting and speaking for herself? The thing is that the series shows us that she does care about playing the solo. She straight up has a whole scene where she tells Haruka about how badly she wants to play her favorite parts in her final year, that part not being left vague at all. The thing a lot of people don't consider about this though is that this is Kaori we're talking about. Kaori's way too kind to raise an objection like that, even if she was suffering in silence the entire time. If she just stayed quiet, then time would pass and at least no one would fight about it anymore regardless of how hurt she was by it. She's selfless to a fault, and it takes Yuko exploding on Reina to put her in a position where she has to realize how tired she is of being so painfully selfless. That's why her acknowledging that she has a problem with the solo audition results and wanting to challenge Reina for her right to play them is so significant. Challenges as a concept are kind of a bad practice in my opinion, and it is clear Taki-sensei only did it because the band more or less forced him, but I think this one is important and necessary for Kaori as a person. She's tired of everyone besides her being happy and wants to cling to this little bit of hope that the others instilled in her that she is allowed to be happy and take what she wants for herself for once. I think it's an important statement to make because honestly, it's okay to be a little selfish with these things. Kaori's biggest flaw is that she gets walked all over for far too long and missed out on a lot of opportunities because of it. So she works hard and prepares for this challenge like her life depends on it. It's too bad that doesn't change what is true. Reina is better at the solo. The narrative never even tries to delude you that Kaori has a chance of sounding better than her no matter how hard she tries. This struggle on her part is doomed to fail from the start. The series gives us this hopeful air that Kaori is finally doing the triumphant thing for herself, but this character progression is moving her both forwards and backwards as a person at the same time. Her inability to accept the results and the fact of the matter demonstrates to the audience that she, the most pure and earnest person in this show, can fall into these habits that take advantage of and abuse players who earn their roles on hard work. Kaori definitely never intended to do it, but by participating in this, she's contributing to reinstating a system that she herself was made a victim of. I really like that characters like Asuka are aware of this too. She never says it outright to Kaori, but makes it entirely clear through her cynical fakeness that she is causing history to repeat before her eyes by not conceding to Reina, who is the better player. She holds out though because she wants that validation. This is her last chance and Kaori just can't let it go. She's in too far to quit. Hibike has no villains in my opinion, but it certainly does have antagonists. Kaori is how you write an amazing antagonist. Someone who is totally justified in feeling cheated by a system, just looking for that little bit of self-gratification that she was denied when she rightfully deserved it, but is not in the right with how she actualizes it in the slightest. It's absolutely brilliant. They could have made her malicious too, but they didn't. Kaori is still a good person. Instead, they made her realistic. They made her human. That takes us to the challenge proper. What happens at the solos is simple and to the point. They both play, and Reina's blows Kaori's out of the water. We knew this was going to happen all along. So Taki-sensei leaves it for the students to decide based on applause. While Kumiko is the lone supporter for Reina, the majority of the band claps for Kaori. This should make her the winner, right? Well, that's when we get the most beautiful resolution to this character. Kaori got to hear for herself how big the gap really was. For those without much of a musical ear, Reina's dynamic contrast and stylization of the solo makes it so much artistic than Kaori's could even pray to be, even if it was played technically correct. Kaori might want this solo so desperately, more than anything, but she's a musician with ears too, and she realizes that when people applaud for her, they're choosing wrong. They're giving the seniority the benefit of the doubt in order to save face. Kaori knew that she had unintentionally reverted the band to everything that she hated. That to her was worse than losing. That pain was worse than the suffering. Content that she would be in less pain if she was honest to herself, she then resigns the solo to Reina, implicitly unwilling to stand for the targeted harassment of this extremely gifted first year beside her. Kaori represents the importance of breaking the cycle. When fixing a system, it's important to hold to the rules that keep it from being broken in your favor, even if it starts to work against you. Since Kaori had the courage to let the solo go, she was able to set a precedent for the band that would evolve it into a healthier place. A lot of her detractors would like to say she should have given up sooner or talked Yuko out of pushing so hard, but I think that takes away from the journey and the internal conflict she was going through. I think she would have been a little too perfect if she pushed these actualizations onto members immediately when they started fighting the audition results. Instead, they wrote her as a flawed, believable person. The journey of Kaori is a perfect example of Hibike never taking the easy way out with character writing. She holds such a bold and interesting character start to finish, and I wouldn't have wanted her any other way. It's everyone's favorite lumberjack who's deserving of happiness. While Hazuki isn't like a super irreplaceable main character the way Kumiko and Reina are, I do acknowledge that unlike Midori, the series gives her a really solid amount of time to flesh out her inner thoughts and feelings about the world and her experiences within it. Rather than just being a confidant to others like Midori, she actually gets plenty of time to take center stage and honestly does a fantastic job at winning over the empathy of the audience. Some people will think I ranked her a little high on the list, but I really think this is the best spot for her. I can tell her arc still needs to be fully explored and ultimately resolved a bit in the third year story, but what we have is really incredible, inspiring writing. Hazuki is just so gosh darn lovable. She's so sincere and innocent about next to everything, even more so than Midori in some regards. I think she is a character pretty much anyone can throw themselves behind and support in her pursuit of happiness and fulfillment. When she first joins the band, she doesn't quite understand the weight of it. She's optimistic, but maybe a little overeager. She goes out and splurges a lot of money on a mouthpiece without actually knowing what instrument it belongs to. Naivety can be frustrating to the viewer, but this wide-eyed innocence of a freshman who's just trying to be all cool like her new music friends is so relatable that you can't help but want to pat her on the back and tell her it's going to be okay every time this naivety lets her down. And unfortunately, you're going to have to tell her that a lot over the course of the series. Yeah, Hibike has all of Hazuki's hopes and dreams locked right within its crosshairs as it reminds us how high school isn't so magical in the way Zac Efron had convinced us it was as kids. One of the functions Hazuki serves in the series is demonstrating the ways that dreams and reality often never play out in quite the same way, but there's still a beauty in the way that life works and the role one has to play in it. Again, harkening back to what Kanade had to learn, life doesn't always owe you rewards. I think the way this is explored with Hazuki is fundamentally different though. With Kanade, it was about why giving in to cynicism is harmful to the person. With Hazuki, it's more about why it's important to never let go of optimism in spite of the challenges life presents to you. Yes, there is a difference between these two concepts. Things don't always work out for Hazuki in all the ways she expects, but extra emphasis on all the ways she expects. That mouthpiece? Yeah, it belonged to a tuba when she was dreaming about playing trumpet. Rather than throwing a fit though, Hazuki embraces the tuba and accepts how she was erratically connected to this instrument through circumstance. When she finds playing the tuba to be unrewarding, she plays it together with Kumiko and Midori and realizes that being a part of something bigger than herself was where the true satisfaction came from. When she fails the audition, she does what she can to really be a team player even when she's not on stage. When she gets rejected by Shuichi, she almost near instantly resolves herself to support him in his romantic pursuits with Kumiko. And Lord knows Shuichi could use some people on his side in that regard. You see, wherever misery finds Hazuki, she finds joy in it. She finds it because every situation has multiple angles that one can attack it from. If she got all defeatist when something challenged her, she knows she would never find that other positive thing waiting for her just a few steps later. And it's not like these things don't bother her, because they do. They absolutely do. Just look at the one scene in the OVA where she talks about how much of a pain love is and how she doubts whether she should have confessed at all. It's really quick. You can catch a single tear slip through there, showing just how much it hurt her beneath what her happy-go-lucky attitude lets her show. I think it is so significant in the scene afterwards when Kumiko tells Hazuki to do her best while her friend is tying her tie. Kumiko sees her efforts and acknowledges them as unbelievably committed and determined despite not being on stage with everyone else. This only goes even further when god-tier percussionist Knuckle forgets a mallet back at school, and Hazuki has to be the one to race back, grab it, and sprint all the way back to the hall with it in the sweltering heat. That's an effort that goes far and beyond what it means to have commitment to something, talent totally notwithstanding. Remember that quote from Goto I read earlier? Not only is it great to show us what a beautiful boy he is, but I believe that quote also serves a secondary function of completely capturing what makes Hazuki such an amazing character. She absolutely has nothing going for her, yet she doesn't give up or get deterred at any point. She never stops trying like mad. She grows in the smallest ways and ultimately finds her fulfillment in her experiences. In the OVA, we see the progression of her needing to cling on to Shuichi's help to carry that heavy tuba of hers, and by the end, we see her carrying it all on her own. I really wonder what direction awaits Hazuki in the future of Hibike. I think whatever road they go with her, though, it's one of those arcs that I am worried about the least in concluding in a way that serves as the best timeline for her. The reason for this is because I know no matter what she faces, this girl is a survivor. No, more than that, Hazuki is a thriver. She's not just going to make it through this, but she's going to see herself down the very best road to her future. Natsuki is definitely the realest one in the cast, for sure. I would even go so far as to say that in bro levels, she's up there with some of the best bro characters in all of anime. She has a journey of her own to go on, but she has a kind of selflessness to her that's just unbelievably admirable at the same time. I think she's just really cool and honestly the person I would want to be friends with most in the cast. She was not always like this though, she really had to evolve into this role, and it's inspiring to see how she can grow to assume such compassion and imparts much needed wisdom even when you might least expect it from her. Our introduction to Natsuki in the series is actually not through the character herself, but the lack thereof. When the low voices meet for their first sectional, she's mysteriously absent much to Goto's frustration. During later sectionals when she is there, she shows up, sets down her euphonium early into practice, and just leans her head out the window. So for a while, we know Natsuki as the girl who doesn't try. However, I always felt like this lack of effort on her part was not totally apathy-induced, as instead of her goofing around or dismissing the seriousness of rehearsal, she just sort of turns her nose up at it like a dog refusing to eat food because they've lost their will to live. I think this is best told through the way she hazily gazes out into the distance, like she's miserably struggling to find a reason to care despite looking so hard for it. This is an important distinction because it's not that she doesn't want to care about band, as she probably wishes she could. The issue Natsuki faces is that she literally cannot find a reason to care anymore. The events of the schism show their effects on every character who experienced it in this show very differently. For Natsuki, these effects manifest in decreased motivation. She explains she initially sided with the older members who felt like practicing hard at music was not worth the effort. After the people in her own year cared enough to quit over it, she felt crushed trying to reason out their side. What was the use of trying if everyone was just going to be subjectively scored anyways? Where was the satisfaction in improving to fit the standards of others? These are some legitimate questions, one she could just not find the answer to despite really thinking about it. As such, she feels locked to the status quo with next to no reason to push herself any more than the absolute minimum, because without those answers, what was the point? I think the other members of the base section do not quite understand this, which is why they write her off as someone who doesn't really try and might as well be a lost cause. I think the turning point in Natsuki's arc comes when Kumiko actually tries to take a different angle with her and be inclusive, asking her to join so they can all try to play together. Natsuki gives her this look that's like, you can't be serious at first, but eventually sort of decides that if she doesn't care much either way, it cannot hurt to entertain the first year and just play along with them anyways. What Kumiko did here was directly confront an elephant in the room that most were trying to ignore. This sets off the tiniest spark which the effects of are felt for the rest of her time in the series. We see from that point on that she starts participating a little more, having opened herself up to at least partaking in the new ensemble, but she still approaches it all with somewhat of a distasteful pessimism. Still, now that she has opened up her mind more, we can see that she is making rational conclusions that things have at least changed in some ways, and they make the ensemble worth entertaining further. For example, practicing marching before Sunfest was something they did not do in her own first year. The thing about a depressive slump, though, is that it isn't quite so easy to overcome even after these rationalizations have been made. Sometime later, even after Sunfest, we find she's back to her usual thing. After all, Sunfest was over, and sure, they tried for that, but would they try so hard for the actual competition? Yeah, right. Except though, we get this small tiny scene where they play a performance of Crescent Moon Dance on a boombox, and in the background we see Natsuki notice and perk her head up a little, responding to the music. This gesture goes as an example that her wall was not really holding up as strong as it was before. The promise of playing such a beautiful, stunning piece actually catches her interest. This only escalates more as we see her both visually and verbally express her desire to put in more effort. It progresses slowly, and it's not always in the foreground, but when the audition rolls around, she's almost completely unrecognizable from the version of her who slept by the window during practice. I think an interesting parallel is the way in which her conversations with others open up as well, feeling more earnest, like she's actually enjoying being with everyone in this band. This feeds back into her desire to work hard and to play with everyone else. Sadly, not all the lost time can be made up for as far as practicing goes. Natsuki fails the audition, losing out to Kumiko, who is a new member to the ensemble but had been playing far longer than her. What's amazing about Natsuki, though, is that she has the maturity to acknowledge that she just was not as skilled as Kumiko. Despite the younger girl's attempts to dismiss herself for her superior, Natsuki waves it off and genuinely throws support behind the person who worked hardest for it. This is such a sweet scene and really goes to show how genuinely she got absorbed into the new atmosphere of the band. She not only learned to care about how much she practiced Euphonium, but also learned to care about everyone else and how much they practiced too. She might have wanted it just as much as anyone, but she can acknowledge and appreciate the efforts that others put in and feel glad that they are glad. She's now an active participant in the world around her, which is really sweet to see. I think what makes me love Natsuki so much is how, unlike Yuko or Kaori, she accepts the new system is the answer to the questions that kept her apathetic. In that way, she cares a lot about maintaining it. From this point in the series on, she cares enough to genuinely throw her support behind anyone who needs it. Kumiko, Yuko, Nozomi, Mizore, Hazuki. God, that scene on the bridge where she gives Hazuki a hug just makes me want to cry sometimes. I'm really happy things worked out for her in the end, getting to play with both Kumiko and Kanade in the band in O's finale. Her admittance was the best reward that didn't come about from her status or luck. It came from hard work and building a drive that allowed her to rocket off her love and support for others. Oh yeah, and she wears probably the best stupid English shirt that I've ever seen and probably will ever see in anime. Nothing is ever going to top Cement's addiction. That shit is hilarious. This is where things start to get real. We're down to only 9 characters, and I'm not messing around anymore. These next 3 take a level of writing we see in the last tier and almost seamlessly rise to match and then surpass it. These are characters that only a show with this much care in it could have conceived. Yuko has come such a long way in my eyes. When I first saw this show, I used to hate Yuko. I used to loathe her with every fiber of my being. I thought she was the single most entitled little brat I had ever seen. She used to be the absolute bottom of the barrel for me, even beneath Shuichi. Never could I have imagined that one day she would be so high on this list in my head, and the fact that she made the top 10 feels unreal. Of all the characters on this list, I feel like Yuko has aged just considerably well with me. Over time, after dissecting the series to the tiniest atom, I found many more things about Yuko that suggest that she's a really smartly written character rather than a poorly written one. It's going to take a lot of explaining though, so buckle in. To start with, I already talked about why Yuko had to be the one to step in for Kaori in her place. Kaori was never going to do it herself, confrontational she is not. Guess who is though? Yeah, that's right. This Ribbon Girl. Ribbon Gal? Whatever. So we got that out of the way. The next question that is raised in response to that is why Yuko does it. The easiest answer is that she harbors a strong idolization of Kaori. She basically crushes on her with every step that she takes that's not left to the imagination. Why though? Other than being someone everyone generally likes, what about Kaori pushes Yuko to go this unbelievably far for her? Well, what if I told you that Yuko, and stick with me on this one, isn't actually acting this way for Kaori's sake? I mean, obviously it is partly fueled by an admiration for her senior. I'm sure she's convinced herself that she's doing it for her sake, of course. After carefully rewatching scenes with her in Season 1, though, it feels like something more has been going on this entire time. Yuko is not fighting back against this result in such an aggressive way because she's trying to get Senpai to notice her. She's fighting back because she wants to instill her sense of justice onto those who she perceives are threatening to obstruct it. What Yuko is doing by starting all this shit with Reina is to satisfy her need to be a savior to those who may or may not need it. I think it helps to remember exactly where Yuko was during the schism and how it would characterize her as someone who felt the need to rush to Kaori's aid so strongly. She was a member of the first years, one of the select group who didn't quit after all the drama. The devotion of those first years to go so far as to quit demonstrate that they as a class felt strongly about the way the older members took advantage of everyone else. You ever stop about why they quit and the second years all more or less stayed and carried on to their third year? The reason is that the groupthink among that subset of the band had a skewed attitude towards justice, and they weren't afraid to take strong actions to make their point. On the whole, the exceptions to that rule tended to stay in the band like Natsuki and Mizore, but Yuko is one of the more radical ones who stayed. You see, this was Yuko's unique brand of justice. Unlike the others who chose to give up on the system after dealing with its nonsense, Yuko watched exactly how the system hurt people like Kaori, and will continue to do so unless there was someone there to keep the good people from being taken advantage of by bad people. This is a noble goal on her end. The reason she's so fiercely insistent on seeing that Kaori gets rewarded in the end is because she is someone who cannot tolerate seeing what she perceives as an injustice unfold before her eyes. This injustice comprises two factors. The first is the distaste of seeing someone undeserving being punished. This is Kaori. The second, and the often ignored one, is that she hates seeing someone who doesn't deserve it benefit from the system. This is where Reina comes into play, and the interlocking mechanisms of Yuko's whole idealism begin to make sense, and also fall apart when one realizes exactly why her way of thinking is so flawed at the start of the series. Something that Yuko makes no secret of is that she hates Reina. If Reina had been a clone of Kaori in terms of personality, I'm convinced she might not have fought so hard against the audition results at all. No, what makes Yuko perhaps even more upset than Kaori not getting to play the solo is feeling like Kaori got cheated out of playing the solo, which is very different. For one, Reina is not the humblest about her talent, Tokubetsu ni naritai and all that. This desire on Reina's part is interpreted as an outright disrespectful slight to her senior in Yuko's eyes, even if we as the viewers know that that isn't the case, but more on that later. Yuko straight up says that Reina's arrogance is insufferable in the meltdown scene, and implies that part of the reason why Kaori should play is because Reina doesn't respect the injustices Kaori had to go through, and the generosity she's showing to Reina as her senior. The second tipping point was her finding out that Reina and Taki's families are acquainted. In her eyes, this gives her probable cause to make the accusation that the teacher is playing favorites. If this were true, it would be seen as a huge injustice and a broken system that needs to be corrected in her eyes. This is the foundation of Yuko's justice. It doesn't come from an outright malicious place. The reason it manifests is because she is convinced that this is the best way to make sure nobody is taken advantage of ever again in this band. However, it is still clear that in spite of all this, Yuko is not just in the wrong, she's probably the person who's in the most wrong in this entire situation. Good intentions don't mean anything if the end result is still doing bad for Reina, Kaori, Taki, and the rest of the ensemble. The place where things begin to fall apart for Yuko is that she has one absolutely fatal flaw. Her justice blinds her. When she convinces herself that something is just, she never lets it go or compromises it even a little. Even when evidence is presented to the contrary, she just ignores it. Her own head is a kangaroo court rigged in her favor. She's devoted to her own self-fulfilling prophecy. Let's start pointing out some things I know some of you have been waiting for me to bring up just to tear down this girl's logic. For one, this isn't what Kaori wants. She tells Yuko multiple times to drop it. You never enact justice on behalf of someone who did not consent to it. It's not your job to police exactly when someone feels they've been taken advantage of. Natsuki even calls her out and says that she's only going to hurt Kaori by enforcing her own ideals in the place of her seniors. Yuko harshly deafens herself to this criticism. Secondly, just like Kaori, doing this absolutely ignores why the system was broken in the first place. Reina is objectively the better player. She should play the solo then. As time goes on, Yuko even realizes this. Kumiko asserts this truth to her and Yuko deafens herself to it again. To her, Reina is arrogant, so that still makes her unworthy even if it's a total non-factor in how the solo is decided. Thirdly, we know Reina is doing this for her own reasons. I won't start dissecting Reina just yet, but her life could also be interpreted as having been dealt an injustice. Yuko makes straw-man assumptions about Reina based on snap judgments that don't feel like the entire story. Why should Yuko learn the entire story though? She already knows what she needs to know based on what she's seen with her own eyes. This is why it's so easy for us to hate Yuko. We know she's out of line as viewers. We know that Reina is more in the right and she is more in the wrong. The important thing to keep in mind though is just because a character is in the wrong, it doesn't make them poorly written. I know some of this may seem a little bit like me trying to give the blue curtains meaning, and it very well might be, but that's why I'm not making the bold claim to say my list is objective. I could see exactly why Yuko is the product of her situation based on the experiences she had. Bad writing would be if we didn't have all this context for her that made her actions unbelievable. I'll reiterate, having been through the audition system myself, there are absolutely people as petty as her. There are absolutely entirely good people who feel like the director may be biased. That's why flawed characters are important. They replicate how flawed people are in real life. Now that I've established who she is and why she's in the wrong about life, how does Yuko grow as a person over the series? Well, I believe her road to redemption begins with the re-audition itself. After basically begging for Reina to throw it and being denied one final time, Yuko starts to feel like it's unavoidable that the first year is going to prove without a shadow of a doubt that she is the better player. As she talks to Kaori one last time, it is clear that Yuko is not feeling so hot about what is about to happen anymore, knowing that Reina won't hold back. The gears finally start to click in her head that she may have been packaging Kaori up and sending her off to be defeated in battle by the better player. The way she gives her shrill, "Hi," and then attempts to turn back to say something just says a million words about how much doubt is spiraling through her. She realizes though that it's too late to stop it from happening, and that the only thing that can be done is to give her a simple good luck and send her on her way. The second Yuko is out of sight though, we see her doubts spiral to life, consuming her and pushing her into a run. She is suddenly sprinting, trying to escape from the poor actions she had enacted on everyone. She looks for any refuge to hide and slams into Natsuki's back. She starts crying, and in her heart, she probably wants to express these feelings of doubt and shame to one of her closest friends. And she thinks about doing it for seconds, but eventually she can't muster the strength to be vulnerable and admit that her ideals had consumed her. So she runs again. She continues to doubt more and more, even supporting Kaori's solo with her applause. Then, when Kaori concedes the solo to Reina, Yuko realizes that she can't run from it anymore. She can't run from the reality that she should have known all along. She was wrong. She should have known it right from the moment when Kaori told her that she doesn't play because she thinks she's good. She plays because she likes to. Yuko had blocked this memory from her mind and fundamentally ignored what everyone around her actually wanted and needed. When that realization hits her, she realized that she had become the villain unknowingly, and she absolutely breaks. She sobs in front of everyone in absolute despair. It isn't what she wanted. It was what she became anyways, though. I am pleased to say that this shattered girl is not where the story of Yuko Yoshikawa ends. In Season 2, we see that she's already changed for the better. The rest of Yuko's presence in the series is demonstrating to the viewers that she wants to become someone better than she was. She never wants to miss the cues from someone that makes her harm people again. We see this immediately with her presence in Mizore's life. The act of Nozomi leaving Mizore behind was one of those things that signaled an injustice to her. Just like with Kaori, she's not wrong about that either. It was an injustice, but Yuko's approach to handling that situation compared to what she did in the Kaori situation is like night and day. What she does differently here is that she actually takes the time to accommodate Mizore's needs rather than launching her revenge quest in Nozomi's direction. Her primary focus here is the person, not justice. That's a huge improvement in understanding that ultimately pays off when Mizore feels like her needs were met and are understood by the end of the arc. Yuko is legitimately a really great friend to Mizore, and never talks down to her except when her negative thinking continues to spew falsehoods about life. Her shift in mindset from punishing the spreaders of injustice to aiding the victims of it makes her so much more likable, endearing, and her actions actually reflect and cause good in other people. Her rejection and hesitation to Nozomi rejoining is mostly geared to her wanting to prevent even further drama when they need to focus on the competition, and because she wants Mizore's needs to be met, not because she has a vendetta against her. I don't really have much to say about her role in Liz and the Bluebird other than she continues to do this for Mizore. She's very sensitive to the girl's well-being and doesn't want her to compromise herself for the sake of Nozomi. She even calls out Nozomi a little bit for not doing the same things she's been trying to do for her the entire time. I think the scene where she talks to Kumiko at band camp really shows exactly the kind of self-reflection she had been making since the fallout in Season 1 over the solo. She admits that her justice and biases hold her to wanting the person she likes more and feels is more worthy based on intrinsic values is the one worthy of playing the solo in her eyes, but she also knows now that it being her belief does not make it the one in the right. Yuko then comes clean to Kumiko and says she has a hard time rationalizing how her ideals fit into the mold of concert band, and whether it is more right for things to be based on skills, sentiments, or something in between. However, the fact of the matter is that her ideals have no place in a system that already exists. As such, if they're going to try hard anyways, then she has to come to realize that the only way to do it is for the best players to play, meaning that she has finally accepted why things have to be this way on the road they have chosen for themselves. Eventually, we see her soften even more, and by the time she's appointed to be the band's president at the end of Season 2, we see a young woman who has grown to more responsibly respect the band's ambitions and lead them down the road they chose to follow the best she can, accepting that she has to compromise in order to be an effective leader for all. The ultimate resolution to her character, in my eyes, comes at the end of O's finale, where she gets up and speaks to the whole band after they failed to progress onwards. The thing about this speech in Yuko is that she can now see what a healthy environment the band has become even in failure. In spite of all of her missteps in the previous year, she finds that by taking the action to work with everyone and not against them, by opening her heart and truly allowing others to help work on the path forward together, failure will only make them stronger as an organization. The band has become a better place than what she knew. All it took was letting her walls down a little just to see the feelings of others. That is a great send-off to this character. Last note, because there hasn't really been a place to talk about this yet, and I want to mention it before I move on, Yuko and Natsuki are so much fun to watch together. I think they have really fun chemistry and act as good counterbalances to one's moral fixedness versus the other's relaxed, easygoing nature that keeps them both in a healthy middle ground. I will never tire of watching them torture each other. Both squabble and disagree a lot, but it's so nice to see how they still be there for each other when one of them is going through something difficult, and believe in her inherent desire to do good things and be a good person. I'm glad the show gave us both these characters, but I'm also glad that they gave us both of them together. Okay, phew. I think that's all I have to say about Yuko. I'm glad repeat watchers have given me a better understanding of her and a better appreciation of her overall. She's a really hard character to like, but I think finding the depth beneath her worst traits uncovers a really, really fantastic character. I never thought I'd say this, but you're great, Yuko. Hibike would really not be Hibike without you. I grew up in a house with 2 siblings, and in fiction, the experience of having a brother or sister is not often portrayed how I know it to be. Don't get me wrong, I don't intend to speak for every person with siblings ever, but fiction often portrays them as a binary that could go one of 2 ways. Either they unmistakably hate each other, or they love each other unconditionally and act like little angels around each other. Rarely do I see a sibling relationship that goes for something in between. I long to see more of that middle road taken in fiction because usually that is the one I find to be the most true and relatable. That's certainly one reason Mamiko is so high on this list. The way the Omae family household works almost strikes me to my core with how easily I can visualize these conflicts unfolding before my eyes. Mamiko and Kumiko don't get along like they're perfect angels to one another. They usually greet each other with snide remarks and maintain a somewhat hostile energy around one another. So this clearly means they hate each other, right? Well, actually no. The series makes it abundantly clear that both Mamiko and Kumiko love each other more than anything in spite of next to never knowing how to show it. There's so much depth to their relationship, and it contributes so much to the overall narrative of Hibike that I just adore every scene these two share. On top of that, Mamiko is actually pretty unique in her own right for helping to communicate a message that is honestly very un-Japanese in nature. So the whole reason Kumiko decided to play music to begin with is because she thought that her older sister Mamiko was so amazing on the trombone. Flashback sequences help communicate that there was a time when Mamiko was so enthusiastic about trombone and loved it with all her heart and soul. She took so much joy in helping her sister learn the basics of buzzing her lips, excited to share her passion with someone who looked up to her just that much. Things changed though, and as Mamiko got older, her priorities seemed to change too. Soon, she began to focus much more on getting into a good college and had to leave trombone behind. It's asserted in the series that a big reason she did this was expectations from their parents. The little we see from the Omae mom and dad in the series suggests they believe that securing an important future comes before silly clubs, hobbies, and fantasies. If one is not going to pursue music as a career, well, is that not just sunk time lost? Hell, even if she did want to pursue it as a career, why would she go for something so useless? Mamiko is a victim to the family unit, one that is especially strong in Japanese culture. One thing about Japan is how highly it values its collectivist society. Your worth to your family and in the eyes of others weighs on how much you can contribute to the infrastructure of the whole. This in turn rewards you with a better life for yourself and your family, but at the cost of personal enjoyment or pursuing your dream unless it happened to fall in line with collectivist goals to begin with. Being a musician or a beautician is a risky venture, so parents will actively discourage a child from following their individualistic dreams in order to better suit the mold of society. This is not an occurrence in every Japanese household, nor is it a thing that is exclusive to Japan, but I've found that when comparing them to my experiences in America, there is a distinct phenomena here. What Mamiko is going through is a real thing, and is very emphasized in Japan to a degree that is different from Western cultures. The whole series, Mamiko acts like she was the mature adult for going along with her parents' wishes and pursuing a fine degree at a college they pushed her to go to, while childish Kumiko goofed around on the Euphonium. You can see just a little each time the siblings interact, though, that while Mamiko's feeling of superiority is there, there's also a little bit of avoidance sneaking into her attitude and body language around music and concert band. You see, hearing about how Kitauji is so successful now at concert band brings out one particular emotion little by little in her: envy. No matter how much she nagged Kumiko about the tension she was putting on concert band as opposed to her studies, all of it was truly self-validating in nature. Why would Kumiko get to goof around and have fun with her passions, while Mamiko had to give up everything she ever really felt passionate about to meet the whims of her parents? She was doing the right thing. And sometimes doing the right thing isn't about what makes her feel fulfilled and happy, but that's just life. Or is it? Eventually, I don't think Mamiko was able to take the internal buildup of just how jealous she was of Kumiko anymore. Each conversation is laced with more and more vitriol until we get to that fateful scene in Season 2 where Kumiko comes home and finds her sister proclaiming that despite all the money the family spent on tuition and housing, she wants to drop out of college. Of course, her parents are flabbergasted. Why now? Why was she intent on throwing away the life they gave her to pursue some beauty school nonsense? They both gaslight her for this choice, seemingly trying to forget how much more powerful their influence is on their child compared to what a child's own free will tends to amount to in these home situations. I don't think the Omaya parents ever exactly realized how harmful their way of parenting was on Mamiko, especially because what they feel is right is just the standard for their culture. Even Kumiko doesn't understand why Mamiko would have a change of heart now of all times. The younger sister feels hurt by her sudden hypocrisy, but the older sister isn't ready to own up quite yet to having been wrong for so many years, so even after 2 fights, she retaliates against Kumiko and pushes her away while she so desperately tries to get herself out of the hole she was stuck in. Eventually, Mamiko runs into Shu. Shu reminds her that she inspired Kumiko to do band in the first place and suggests that she listens to the ensemble play sometime. Up until now, Mamiko viewed having to admit this decision that she made as a shame to her younger sister. After riding her high horse for so long over her, the admittance to having been wrong about what was the best thing for her was something Mamiko felt insecure about having to express to her. Again, this feels like a genuine sibling thing. In my experience, opening up to your siblings takes a lot more effort to do than with others, especially as the older one. What Mamiko essentially has to do is relinquish the power she held in that dynamic as the model child in order to find peace, and I can sympathize with struggling to do so. However, when she goes and listens to the CD of Kumiko playing, I think this is the point where her pride is finally swallowed. Mamiko learned the long and the hard way that there did not need to be a power dynamic between her and her younger sister. Being open and honest will never make Kumiko think less of her. Just as she inspired her sister at a young age, her sister can inspire her to do what she wants with her life. If there's an episode of Hibike that will always make me cry, look no further than After School Obligato. The heart-to-heart Mamiko and Kumiko have is done so organically with dialogue that still expresses their familiarity with one another, but also the honesty with which they can finally speak about their experience growing up together and the ways the other's influence affected them. The best part, I think, is that it still has sibling banter, but the actors deliver it in a way that makes it feel like a truly heartfelt exchange, even if it seems so casual on paper. Those last words, "don't leave with any regrets," come up again, and coming from Mamiko, it feels very special and genuine. Even removed from the context of Japanese culture, I feel like it's becoming all too common sentiment to dismiss the fantastical for the practical. Not everyone in this world can achieve their dreams, but I think there's something to be said about at least trying to see if you can in your short life. If you want to attempt to be a musician or a beautician or anything that makes you feel passionate, why not at least try? There will always be time for Plan B later on, but as Mamiko found out, trying to get back to Plan A after you rejected it is a somewhat painful road to try and double back down. I just love seeing a show seriously weigh in on why dreams are still worth pursuing, why memories are still worth having, why fun is still worth having. Hibike is not a forgiving universe. We see characters fail a lot to achieve what they set out to do, even by doing everything right. You never know that you will fail though unless you commit yourself to it, so don't give in to the pressure from others or the odds or anything that's deterring you. Pursue something, express yourself. Never forget that you'll have someone to support you every step of the way. They may not be immediately apparent, but there's always someone who will. When Kumiko gets on the train the next morning and starts crying, she realizes just how important it was that Mamiko helped nurture her into loving something she genuinely enjoyed while her parents were doing the exact opposite thing to their older sister. She feels genuine regret that she never realized how much it hurt for her older sister to give up all those things. She wishes she could go back and inspire her to pursue her dreams sooner, and maybe the two of them could have played together one day. What's done is done in that regard, but one thing is still true. Kumiko is the product of a sister who loved her very much. A sister who genuinely wanted her to find happiness where she sought it most. I loved the Euphonium because you were there. I love concert band because you were there. One-chan, I love you. Approaching Nozomi with a critical eye makes me wonder how much credit I should give or withhold from her. I think all these characters are flawed to some degree, but Nozomi a little more so than the rest of them. I think in terms of effect size when it comes to mistakes, she really slipped up hard, and when your competition is Yuko, that is saying a lot. Did she mean to hurt Mizore as badly as she did? No, there definitely wasn't malice on her part doing it. Intentions aside though, Nozomi's own insecurities and carelessness still did a number on the other girl in this equation. At the same time, why is it that we root for the relationship these two share then? Why is it that Nozomi is still unmistakably someone we want to get her stuff together? Well, Nozomi is complicated, that's why. She was never someone who set out to do one bad thing in her entire life. Humans aren't a binary of their actions that inflicted harm or caused good. They are a product of both. Nozomi is like the yin and yang of Hibike characters, and neither is more consequential to the other in terms of interpreting her or the events she endures as a person. I would like to say that as much as I love Mizore, she has just as many maladaptive thought processes going on, which is why she is such a great character, but she's the shy and more vulnerable of the two, so she usually gets a pass for being thought to have flaws at all, unlike Nozomi. That's why I feel like it's important to give Nozomi the same benefit of the doubt and see exactly how her flaws help service her and make her a much more realistic person. I just want to say right off the bat, I love that Nozomi's role as the savior of Mizore is not glorified and is actually subverted when it's all said and done. I see too many godly uwu anime Jesus characters who come into the life of struggling introverts with emotional problems, don't respect their autonomy in the slightest, and are basically rewarded for it with no consequences. That's just not how real life works. When Nozomi pulls Mizore into her life, it is a good thing, yes, but I think a critical mistake Nozomi makes when befriending Mizore for the first time is what exactly makes Mizore different from her. Nozomi is a very sociable, kind girl who easily has more friends than she knows what to do with. She's the popular girl, which is great for her. She gets the idea in her head one day to reach out to the shy girl and take her under her wing. So far, so good. She gets Mizore involved with concert band, and now the two of them have an activity to share in and enjoy together. They even resolve together after their failure in middle school that they get gold in high school. Great. I think Nozomi does everything she's supposed to do with this newfound friendship here. At first. When they get to high school, Nozomi slips up and makes probably the single biggest mistake she could have made. During the schism, Nozomi was strongly on the side that the seniors weren't taking things seriously, so she wanted nothing to do with the program. This is fair, and the issue is not so much that she decides to quit following this, it's that in the process, she doesn't tell Mizore that she left. That visible heartbreak we see in Mizore's eyes when she has to find out secondhand that the person she looked to before anyone else in the world did not even think she was important enough to talk to before abandoning their one shared point of contact, is just crushing. I'm not going to say there aren't times when Mizore is a little clingy to Nozomi, there are, but she really did the poor girl dirty by assuming that she thought about things the same way she did. The reasoning Nozomi gives herself in her own mind is pretty solid. Mizore is practicing so hard, she probably doesn't want to quit. Nozomi could just leave her be while she left on her own. The problem is that Mizore was not playing at that point in time just to get better and be a great player. She was playing very specifically because she was working to uphold the promise she made with Nozomi. For someone with a lot of friends like Nozomi, the proposition of promising to get gold with Mizore was probably not very weighty. At this time, Nozomi probably did not see Mizore as someone she invested more time into than any other friend, and probably assumed that Mizore would not overthink the promise either. Mizore doesn't have a lot of friends like that, though. She's not going to interpret this as a general statement, she interpreted it as the person who meant the entire world to her asking something of her. Nozomi failed to realize that she was this girl's entire support system at that time, and there was nobody and no promises for her to fall back on when she bailed on Mizore. That is a huge mistake. That said, Nozomi eventually comes back to the band and has to grapple with the consequences of her action, which is a notion I really love. At first, Nozomi doesn't really understand why she can't return. She heard the culture changed, she was ready to devote herself to that environment once again, everyone wins, right? Why the pushback from Asuka and Yuko all of a sudden? Nozomi even had an alibi that she wanted this all along. While that's true, it comes with the heartbreaking revelation for her to learn exactly what it turned Mizore into. I'll talk more about Mizore and her internal thoughts during all this later, but the big shock for Nozomi is that she had done her a great disservice and even set her back farther than she once was when she chose to make saving her a casual fling rather than a serious commitment to her as a friend that she so desperately needed. So in their reunion, Nozomi acknowledges how awful the misunderstanding was and makes sure Mizore understands how proud she continues to be of her progress. From this point on, Nozomi pushes herself to do a better job of being there for Mizore and making sure her own needs are met and cared for. Now, if that's where the story ended for Nozomi, that would be a solid enough character arc, but she would have been farther down on this list. It's not over, though. We're not even close to being done with Nozomi. I love this about Hibike. It could have been totally done with Nozomi forever after this was resolved, but it goes so much farther to make it even more complex than it was. I've gotten to touch on Liz and the Bluebird a little on this list so far, but now that we've arrived at one of the two protagonists of the film, I get the pleasure of really getting into how this movie evolves the relationship of Mizore and Nozomi in a way that makes them so much more complicated and so much more interesting. It shows how beautifully and seamlessly it can build on already established characters and find a way to continue what might have been thought to be resolved journeys for both of these girls. So what happens with Nozomi after she clears up things with Mizore? Things go back to normal between them, right? Well, sort of. On the outside they did. The two of them were more than happily spending time together as they did before. They were even working on a duet together. How sweet and poetic, the way it symbolizes their growth back into a healthy relationship. Except, the duet isn't coming together quite right. It's a little disjointed. Well, there's two stories going on here as to why they cannot seem to connect on a level that clicks like a puzzle piece, but for now, let's just focus on Nozomi's side of it. Ever since they had their falling out, Nozomi's been making more of an effort to be conscious of how Mizore feels, but it is important to note just how much she overcorrects. The story of the Liz and the Bluebird fable comes up multiple times, so here's a quick summary for those who need a refresher. Liz lives on her own and takes in a bluebird who poses as a girl. The two live happily together for some time, but as winter draws closer, the bluebird starts to long to soar farther. So Liz begrudgingly lets her go, allowing her to soar farther than she ever could with Liz holding her back. The movie leads the viewer to believe that Nozomi is the bluebird at first, with Mizore's ineptitudes holding her back from living a more fulfilling and socially adjusted life, but we eventually come to find that the actuality of the matter is that Nozomi is closer to Liz. Liz wants to shelter this bluebird with her so that she'll never be lonely again, which is why it hurts so much to let her go eventually. That doesn't sound like Nozomi, does it? Nozomi has a lot of friends, more than she knows what to do with. To that I say, well, Liz had friends too. She would go out into town and tons of people would know her name and talk to her and all that. That's not the kind of relationship that made her one with the bluebird so special. The bluebird lived and breathed for Liz. She followed her wherever and wasn't a companion for not just certain tasks, but for life. The two lived together, ate together, even slept together. This was the kind of thing that Nozomi wanted more than anything after realizing just how much Mizore cared for her. She began to value what Mizore gave to her on a level that made her almost secure about ever accepting that those feelings of exclusive and unconditional admiration could ever fade one day. She was desperate to cling to that feeling of being someone's number one that she just didn't get anywhere else. That said, Mizore and Liz and the Bluebird finally starts to grow up. She too has to fly away whether she realizes it or not, although the entire time she is caged by her love for Nozomi. Mizore doesn't want to go to music school or make other friends because she has Nozomi, a notion which is not fair to her. Nozomi soon realizes though that these things are getting themselves set up for Mizore anyways, and that this girl growing up into a much healthier woman would be inevitable. She has to start grappling with the idea of letting her go for the sake of Mizore's own happiness, which is heartbreaking for Nozomi. Nozomi tries to delude herself a little bit as a bargaining mechanism. When Mizore mentions music school, Nozomi sort of half-seriously says she would apply too. Nozomi is trying desperately not to let her hold back Mizore from following her dreams by attempting to keep up with the girl's rapid growth. It's just not going to work though. Nozomi mentions applying to Niyama, and the teacher seems a bit surprised, unsure in her ability to actually follow through on applying. Coming from her teacher, who would know better than anyone how capable someone is at making music a career, that is not a reassuring sign for the girl. Yuko calls her bluffing too, and how Nozomi's insecurities are hurting Mizore in the long run if she's trying to keep this delusion going. It's not just career prospects either. Mizore was even starting to make entirely new friends to show her lessening dependence on Nozomi to form meaningful social attachments. When she asks if Urika can come to the pool with them, Nozomi seems surprised, and the tone suggests that she is somewhat threatened by this. It was seeming like there might quickly become a time when Mizore has no use for Nozomi anymore, at least to the same degree of dependency that she had before, a prospect that frightens Nozomi a little bit. Throughout the movie, Nozomi tries to act like these changes don't bother her in order to preserve the growth that Mizore was showing by allowing distance to seamlessly open up between them. By doing that though, she really ignores Mizore's own feelings and just focuses on making herself feel better about a situation she's unhappy with. This is her half of the disjoint. Nozomi is trying to let the bluebird go, but she is struggling at every step to do it and cannot truly accept that she has to for the life of her. If Nozomi was truly okay with any of this, she would not be feeling this emotional distress that she is. And since she can't dismiss the emotional distress of the inevitable departure, she's ignoring the ways Mizore feels about this. Nozomi thinks she's being supportive, but in all honesty she's being just as selfish in her mindset as she was before their third year started. So then we have the big climactic scene where Mizore wows everyone with her amazing solo, just leaving Nozomi in the dust. This is the final straw for her composure. Nozomi now sees more tangibly than ever that she can never keep up with the rapid and uncontrollable growth that Mizore is going through as a person, and just runs off, feeling like she was the one who was truly abandoned by her friend. The emotional resolution of this movie comes in the form of realizing that while Nozomi never found a way to act in accordance with how Mizore feels, the other half of the duo had become emotionally mature enough to meet that distressed person in the middle and help bring them to a mutual understanding through her matured ability to truly rationalize the situation for what it truly was. What she is essentially telling Nozomi in this scene is to acknowledge how far Mizore herself has come, but to never forget what Nozomi did for her. Nozomi helped her walk, which helped Mizore teach herself how to run. If Nozomi never went out of her way for the girl in the first place, these changes in Mizore never would have happened. Nozomi does not have to worry about the love in Mizore's heart ever going away because that kind of impact a person can have is not so easily erasable. Mizore still loves Nozomi for everything that she is. Even if they grow apart, they would never really. So, the movie ends with perhaps the best and most hopeful message for Nozomi's future. Nozomi promises that she is going to back up Mizore's solo perfectly, if she just allows a little bit of time for her to learn how. This line is not so much about the actual solo, but more so a promise from Nozomi that no matter how many years it takes, she will evolve into someone who can properly be there for Mizore in the ways that she needs. It's the kind of internal change that may take years, but one day she's going to be there in the exact capacity that is worthy of someone she loves. I think this is an amazing message for those following Nozomi's character arc throughout the film because understanding exactly how a person needs you is a tricky task for any relationship. Nozomi unquestionably is someone who did what she felt right but could never quite sync up her own desires with that of Mizore's. However, as the last still of the movie suggests, they got closer to doing so with every struggle and conflict of interest along the way. I feel like this movie promises that things will eventually stabilize and become healthier for these two. Just with time. All that time is worth it though. When you have someone who means the world to you, there isn't enough time that you can give to make yourself the very best you can be for them. Here we are. This is the top tier. Now that we're down to 6 characters, I'm going to say from this point on, we're only talking about characters that I find legitimately hard for me to personally find fault in. There were some amazing characters before this, but these characters I think are legitimately so near perfect in my eyes that I'm a little intimidated to properly analyze each one. There's so much at work here that catching everything is going to be a daunting task. Try I will, though. Alright, kicking off the best of the best, we have Haruka. When I was a camp counselor, I was having a late night chat with some of my co-counselors once, and I don't remember how our conversation led to this, but one of them said something that night I'll never forget. I think we really overvalue extroversion in our leaders. A lot of great leaders are extroverts, but that's not necessarily what made them qualified to lead. That stuck with me. I'm a pretty introverted person, and I've always felt deterred from taking on leadership roles because of it. I always tell myself that I can't possibly fit the model of a leader that people need in order to thrive. I don't have the charisma to ignite the flames in the hearts of others. Then I look at Haruka and just think about how bogus all that really is. Haruka is brilliant. It is so refreshing to see this sensitive and timid, yet kind and organized person as the president of this massive club. Some of you might think I put her too high. Well, I disagree strongly. Part of these feelings are personal, as Haruka touches a soft spot I personally relate to, but she's just so narratively strong besides that. It's so hard to be taken seriously when you're shy, but it doesn't mean that shy or introverted people are without passion, they just express it differently. Haruka really grapples with the challenges that someone who is kind at heart faces when trying to get people to take her seriously, and to hold her head together as the world falls apart around her. It's important to see that despite doing her best early on to properly listen to everyone, direct them, lead them, and be someone they can like, she struggles to be properly respected. Haruka does not have that same singe in her voice that Taki or Asuka do, the kind that snaps people to focus and inspires them to be better when given criticism. For some time, Asuka is treated as the face of the band, so to speak. She's the one with the people skills that makes her an easy face to slap on a label of the band at Sunfest so Kitauji can be like, hey, check out this girl, she's so cool and awesome, she's representative of us. People kind of default to wanting to stand behind Asuka for this reason as the proper president, and not Haruka, who seems like she'll just shatter if someone looks at her funny. Asuka wants none of it though. She knows she's not what the band needs. She just is what they think they want. Nobody is willing to give Haruka a proper chance because they're too fixated on what a leader should look like. That makes the job to prove herself all the harder and more frustrating. After Aoi quits, I think this is where Haruka's character really takes off. She really wants to be the assertive leader who can inspire people to do whatever helps the band move forward because she cares so much about its success. No matter how hard she tries to push her comfort zones though, her natural softness keeps getting in the way. She couldn't convince the first years not to quit during the schism, she couldn't even convince Aoi to stay. This leads Haruka to assume that her personality is what's holding the band back and keeping tension rolling through even despite the progress that they've made. I believe that seeing the way Taki was able to bring everyone together to get their butts practicing only made her more envious that she couldn't be that person that the band needs. She thinks that Asuka is what the band needs, but it's being held back by her. The way Haruka grills Kumiko is heartbreaking when she can only turn back a response from her that her kindness is the only attribute of hers worth any mention. There's a lot at play here though. For one, it's not her introverted or kind nature that makes her struggle to be a leader. Taki, I would personally describe as a more introverted and protected man the more you get to know him, yet he showed up and got everyone rolling. That's the biggest error on Haruka's end. The reason she is struggling is self-doubt because she buys into narratives that aren't applicable to leadership, trying to lead as someone she's not. Second of all, the band themselves is also at fault for playing into those narratives that are working in some cruel feedback loop that makes Haruka do her job the wrong way and makes them believe more that gentle leadership is unhealthy to the band. What you're looking at right now is a chart that demonstrates how this toxic relationship works. Now, Asuka isn't so fooled by these weird social constructs. She knows that Haruka is paying them far too much mind and just needs to do her job. Not in the way she's expected to, but in the way she's meant to do. She tells her to get back in there and be a leader. Haruka bites back against that backseat leadership by yelling at her to go be the leader she knows so well. She goes on to say that she only took the role because Asuka turned it down. Asuka, though, says a line that still gives me chills to this day. Then you should have refused too, right? This rightfully stuns Haruka to silence. I think it's worth exploring what Asuka defines as leadership and why she knows that in spite of images, Haruka is the leader the band truly needs. Asuka has little regard for the band as a whole really until very late into the series. She has selfish motives despite her natural people skills. It's like Natsuki said earlier, you don't always like what you're good at. The band doesn't need a charismatic social butterfly to lead them. What the band needs is someone who genuinely really cares about them, someone who wants to see them succeed. Love for the organization and the people in it is what makes a leader. I think this is what my co-counselor meant all that time ago. It doesn't matter who you are, you can inspire others as long as you care. Asuka, at this point, does not. Haruka does. That is why she is most suited to lead. When Kaori brings over potatoes and milk to Haruka's place and starts chowing down on them, the club president notes how odd it is that the club's Madonna isn't fitting her image. Kaori simply tells her that Madonna likes eating potatoes and continues eating it. This is her own way of assuring Haruka that the ways people inspire others are independent of who they are. She can be the club's Madonna and still like potatoes. Haruka can lead while still being herself. Haruka might not be the most outwardly personable, but she was courageous to assume the helm when the band was in shambles. Just the will to do that proved her right to lead. That day on, she returns to the band, more confident in who she is and what she has to do. I really like the moment later on when she sees Kaori working hard, Asuka with her, and resolves that she has to do this president thing by herself. Haruka is affirming that it is time to be a leader without feeling the need to shackle herself to her much more popular friends and creating expectations for herself that don't need to exist. It's her way, her time to do things how she wants to. Oh yeah, and let's not forget about that killer Barry sax solo at the station concert. The proposal from Taki-sensei kinda comes in the middle of the Asuka drama, so at first she stumbles over the idea, somewhat scared to stick out too much, but then her mindset is snapped to a different end when Asuka tells them it's just a club. Haruka doesn't believe the same things that Asuka does. She knows what the club means to her. She absolutely refuses this idea that it's okay to so casually dismiss all their hard work. To Haruka, band was more than just a club. It was a place where she realized herself, where she could grow and continue to realize herself, in fact. She will never accept that she doesn't love everything about this activity and the group. And then, in front of the whole band's eyes, the image that everyone had of Asuka is shattered. They see that ideal leader they dreamed her to be gone like the wind as she so casually turns their back on all of them. The band is suddenly so lost and confused without this figure. Haruka steps up though. She fills that gap and reminds everyone that Asuka was just human. She was an idealized person that all of them had created and had told themselves they thought they needed. They never considered her weaknesses. They never considered that she was not carrying the spirit of the organization in her heart. Haruka makes a proclamation that they should remind Asuka what everyone else loves about this band. This time, they should support her. Haruka invokes that her love for the ensemble, the thing that made her qualified to lead, was what she needed to pass on to someone who needed it most. Someone who needed to be inspired by a leader. Haruka asks for everyone to help her with this. They not only do it, but they do it without question. She mobilizes the band, not through charisma, but through passion. Then she gets up on that stage and shows Asuka her passion firsthand by grabbing her sax and playing this absolutely jaw-dropping solo for everyone to see. That's Haruka's passion. That is the love that made Haruka the perfect president for this band. I think that's the perfect place to call it for Haruka. I just adore her. She makes me want to show my passion for the things that matter to me. She makes me want to do it in my own way. She's just excellent. Overcoming all that self-doubt, being a role model, and shattering long-held social constructs. I would have felt honored to have a president like her. Taki is a complicated man. There are many times when you want to stick him as one thing, but then another side of him comes out of nowhere, and then that contextualizes the way you felt about him before. Each time he reveals a new side of him, it feels consistent with his character and his history as a person. I think before I start taking apart each characteristic of his, there's a bit of personal history I have on why I like Taki a lot that I think I should clarify in order to better explain my stance on him. I idolized my band director in my freshman year of high school. He's a very respected musician and worked remarkably hard for all of us, saving face to keep us pushing to be the best we could. For a long time, he felt like a god among men, someone who truly never faltered or was held up by any humanly limitations. As I got older, though, my perspective on him changed. I learned a lot more about the man he was behind the podium, and I found out that he did have those humanly limitations. That sounds obvious to some people, but when looking at Taki, this discovering and shedding of idolization I felt was just so perfectly captured here. Taki tries to keep his professional and personal lives separate, but the truth is he never really separated them in the first place. They breathed as one unit, and how he works defines how he has lived his life. We're introduced to him through a scene where he sort of awkwardly bothers this young couple trying to get fortunes. He kind of fumbles around with his phone and makes a little bit of a fool of himself, but I think that's important for establishing what kind of person he is. When he shows up in the classroom, he's a bit more put together than the streets, because it is his job after all. He introduces himself, and things are just going peachy. Right now, this just seems like any other run-of-the-mill sports anime where they'll all work hard from this point on and all that. But then Hibike does something pretty cool. They don't work hard right out of the gate. The effects of the schism from last year are still lingering. They all half-heartedly practice the piece Taki assigned to them, and it goes horribly to the surprise of nobody when it comes time to come back as an ensemble. So what is the kind and awkward director going to say? He'll give them a speech about it being a start and that they just have to work even harder, right? No, not at all. We get the infamous line, "Nan desu ka? Kore." This line, meaning "what is this," is actually a lot more threatening and scary when you break it down and examine the enunciation of it. "Nan desu ka" on its own already means "what is this" without needing to specify "kore," which literally means "this." Japanese is different than English, where including the subject is not necessary in most cases, where it's very clear what one is talking about. Taki saying "nan desu ka" was more than enough to give him a quizzical tone of confusion, but by tacking on the "kore" at the end after pausing for half a second, you hear his voice dip and the disappointment really set in as he doubles down on exactly what has upset him so much. That, of course, being the horrible playing he's hearing after being told that they wanted to gun for nationals. Taki proceeds to rip them to shreds and leave, deeming it a waste of his time to teach them. People have asked me if this is representative of band directors, and while I can only speak to my own experience, I can definitely say yes. I had my own director, who I must remind you I love to death, haggle my entire section for slow resets during marching band because we were hot when it was only 75 degrees Fahrenheit out. Directors do not put up with your shit when they could be slacking off too, but are giving it their all. What's different about Taki compared to other teachers is that he's just as much a performer as everyone else in the concert band. He needs to do more than instruct him if they are serious about being competitive. Directors need to choose a piece, learn it inside and out, and then carefully mold the creative direction of it to make sure that it's able to win gold. When Yuko talks about how judges will say that a band was doomed from the minute they chose a piece, that was the director's misstep that is equally important as the individual players playing it. Why should Taki go to so much effort and give his all for a band that isn't willing to do the same? He wants to go to nationals too, of course, but it's no small commitment on his part. If the ship goes down, he will too. I've seen some people call Taki selfish for being so harsh when he clearly has his own motives for wanting to take the band to the top, but I feel like this is a really cold take about his character and music as a whole. Yes, Taki is doing this because of his late wife, but that's what we call in music passion. The series goes very far to recognize that to perform better, to play beautiful music, you need to be a little selfish. A band full of apathetic lollygaggers is never going to make beautiful music. That's why Reina is so great at trumpet, and why Mizore breaks free and starts playing brilliant music when she learns to play for herself and Listen the Bluebird. Taki is doing nothing wrong by having his own reasons. He's just looking for a team who cares as much as he does about achieving greatness. On top of that, Taki legitimately does do everything he can to help his students. He goes around and teaches them breathing techniques, pitch training, and other good habits for music. His methods are ultimately effective, and we find quick improvement in the students that allows the band to not only go to Sunfest, but to nationals in the long run. I think it's hard to process for a lot of people who are used to gentler teaching methods why Taki acts so seemingly mean to his students, but the truth is, he is seriously not. He only gets mean or on someone's case when they should know better or have something prepared far ahead of rehearsal. This is not being harsh, it's holding students accountable for their work. I've been in those kids' shoes too, and it sucks getting called out or being told not to play a certain part, but that's for the good of the entire ensemble and ultimately pushes me to put in that work to avoid not being prepared. A good teacher recognizes that greatness is something you work for and not something that you can be expected to get handed to you, and this is why Taki excels as a teacher. That said, Taki is also human despite all these strong philosophies about music and improvement proving to be effective. One important part of Hibike is the relationship between student and director, and that includes not just the bond they share at a musical level, but also a personal one. At first, Taki is very insistent on keeping his professional and personal lives separate around the students whenever possible. I mentioned that his late wife Chihiro was his passion earlier, and that it is important in music to have a passion, but he's never open about that passion at first. The why music question in his life is one he never felt pressed to share. His speech before Sunfest was next to nothing, wanting to keep that separation. The thing is though, with so many students trying to figure out that why music question for themselves, sharing those things in some fashion has more power and effect on them than he realizes. As the details of his backstory trickle out over the series, we see exactly how it makes him and the students stronger for it. When Kumiko goes back to school to get her phone after struggling with the passage that Taki took her off of, the first crack in his armor was made when he starts rambling about how he didn't want to have the same job as his father, but loving music brought him back to it anyways. He notices that Kumiko responds in agreement to his offhand comments, a little surprised by how she also shares that sentiment. So when she's leaving, he imparts with her the little encouragement to keep working on that part if she truly loves music. He chooses to have faith that her passion can help her achieve what she wants, and this inspires Kumiko and ultimately brings her back onto the part in due time. In Season 2, we come to find out Taki can't really hide the elephant in the room anymore. It was not so much a matter of if he would have to be open and honest with his students, but when. The issue of his wife is just challenging for him as a human, though. It's one of his mortal weaknesses, the one he was afraid to show to others because it'll demote him back to an ordinary man when he feels like he needs to maintain his godliness for the sake of the concert band. When Hashimoto lets that fact slip, I love the dual imagery of the percussion instructor describing how broken he was compared to the trombones doing a loving imitation of his nandesu kore, when they have no idea such words came from such a sincere and honest passion to achieve the things his wife wanted to during her lifetime. Then, the scene in the rain with Kumiko and Taki. God, this scene gives me chills. Kumiko runs into Taki at an inopportune time when he's on his way to bring flowers to his wife. He's hesitant still to talk to her about it, somewhat awkwardly beating around the bush with her as he drives her home. There's a number of points when he could clam up and keep his true feelings within, but on his own discretion he pushes out a little bit more of his motives and feelings to his student. He leaves in a bit of a hurry after that, but just this feeling of his humanity showing to someone who saw him as an immovable object a season prior is just so warm. I think the character animation and the absolutely stellar acting from legendary voice actor Takahiro Sakurai does a great job of portraying how this openness reminded him that his passion was not only what brought the band so far, but what brought him so far back from the husk he used to be. It's that love for her that he is carrying forward that has revived him as a person and inspired him to live on the hope that he has a new purpose. I love that the students stumble across the same flowers he had with him the next morning. Nothing brings that emotion to me quite like the notion that he got them to say, "I'll always be thinking of you," as he continues to pursue something leading him forward towards happiness and fulfillment and away from surrendering despair. I'm not even at the scene where Reina asks him what his wife was like yet. That one can straight up make me bawl. At first, he looks at Reina quizzically, unsure if he should be upset word had gotten around or not. He figures that it was bound to happen and then just starts reciting a couple facts about her, but that's not what Reina wanted. She pries further, begging him to basically be honest with her and be human. She wants him to tell her what she was like as a person, how she made him feel. Reina had idolized Taki as some kind of god up until then, loving the concept of him rather than the actual person she was. She wanted to truly grow up and see Taki as a human for the first time. Taki realizes that intent with disbelief and sort of falls short of words, wondering if it's okay. He eventually gives in and respects that he may be their teacher, but there's no reason to maintain stoicism when he's performing right alongside them. It takes trust from both ends to be open and honest in order to work well together, so he lets his vulnerability show and emphasizes the things he loves about his wife. Her energy, the life she filled a calm man like him with, the heartbreak he felt being without her, and the way he felt like she had called him to step back into a world where he could be happy again. Look, I know the moment when Reina says she loves him is mad cringe, and it's definitely supposed to feel that way, but you can sincerely tell that hearing how much she admires Taki makes him so grateful and happy to have come this far. He was scared that his own motives and passions would bring his students to hate him, but he was so glad that they could accept him for all he was as a person, that he could perform with people who would genuinely support his passions. They could never replace his wife, but his students became something he could learn to live for. The sentiment is just so beautiful. If we ever got another Hibike spin-off like Liz and the Bluebird, I would want it to be about Taki. Can you imagine what a prequel movie about Taki-sensei would be like? I dare say it could surpass Liz if it had the right director. I want more of this man's story. I think his journey goes so much more beyond being a mentor. It's his own journey, too. It's so hard to rank the characters in this tier, but just because he's number 5 doesn't mean that he's not any less special to me. He makes me want to go and thank my own director for his own humanity when I go to visit him. He's not just a great teacher, he's a great person. One who genuinely bonds with and looks out for his students, discovering a little bit more about himself along the way. Oh boy, of all the entries on this list, Asuka was the one I knew was going to be the most challenging to write. Not because I have any reservations towards her, quite the opposite in fact. I mean, she's in the near perfect tier. I have nothing but praise to sing for how she's written. No, the challenge with Asuka is understanding her is a monumental challenge, one even more daunting than the 3 characters above her if you can believe that with how deep I've been diving into all this sweet development Hibike gives us. The biggest obstacle is something that a lot of the characters themselves state throughout the show. Asuka very rarely lets her true self through to the surface. A lot of what we see from Asuka is her fabricated fake self that is used to deter people from ever moving in closer towards her insecurities. The way she does this is by weaponizing the phenomena that Taki was subconsciously using. By appearing overly strong with her superb acting, everyone will respect her, but no one will touch the real her. Why does she want to keep people from meddling, though? Well, if too much of a stir goes on, she won't be able to fly under the radar and achieve what she really wants, which is for her father to hear her playing. Asuka grew up in an emotionally abusive household. I try to avoid using labels like that lightly, but this is the one time in the series where I sincerely feel like it's earned. Asuka's mother is not a good one. Watching that scene where she storms down to the school to demand that she quit the club is chilling. Asuka knows that no one is coming to help her. The only person she can rely on to get fulfillment out of life is herself. She needs to achieve what she wants on her own strength, not letting others get dragged into matters that don't concern them. This fight, to Asuka, is hers and hers alone. To her, this is what it means to be an adult and to act like a proper member of society. This so clearly manifests when she's asked to weigh in on several different occasions in the series. Knowing that she has to put up with her abusive mother on her own, it's easy to see why she thinks others should have that same courtesy to butt out of areas where they're being a bother. She inflicts this judgment to Aoi, Kaori, and Nozomi over the series, knowing that each of their pleas to start drama in her eyes is stepping out of line and holding back the band who doesn't need their burden right then and there. Asuka usually avoids expressing these opinions as they'd usually be burdensome in their own right, but the viewer can tell she's always thinking it. She sort of cynically believes the worst in people because in her eyes, everyone who wants to make it about themselves should shut up, suck it up, and get back in line if they want to get anywhere in this unforgiving world. That's how she survived living with her mother. Her individual desire is something that has to be tucked away, otherwise it's selfish and she'll dissolve into a broken, depressed failure of a woman. The more Asuka lives in this little world of hers, the more absorbed with it she becomes. Her feelings of dissent on the actions of others begin to turn into superiority. She's so tired of everyone around her trying to act like they know what's good for others. She knows better than anyone that real people hold their own interests at heart and won't truly speak for the regard of anyone else. That's the way her mom is. Asumi Tanaka doesn't know what Asuka wants. She'll say she's doing it for her daughter's sake when she's doing it for her own. This is the wall that Asuka has built. She never dares to cross it. There's no point. It was the only defense she could muster to protect herself. Under those walls, though, what did Asuka really want? Well, she never gave up on desiring things. I think she was always intrigued why her father sent her that euphonium. Why was he meddling in an affair he wanted no part of? Why did he seem to want to put himself in a place to actively resist Asumi? Was it out of spite? Maybe. The fact still is that Asuka did grow to like the euphonium, and the euphonium helped her cope for many years by venting out feelings that she had to keep hidden from the rest of the world. So when she saw her father as a judge for nationals, she felt as though she had to be a little bit selfish and was called to thank him for that gift regardless. Now at first she planned to do it quietly. Asuka was going to do this thing but do it in her own way that her mother agreed with so she wouldn't be causing any trouble by seeking it out. If it was convenient enough to do, she might as well gun for nationals with everyone else to let her sound reach her father. That couldn't last though. Her mother's selfish desires of her own pushed her to become furious with how devoted Asuka was becoming to the euphonium, regardless of how good her grades were. It was rapidly becoming challenging to keep up this charade without ruffling the feathers of her mother, her director, and the students of the band. So even though her tiny dream was becoming a little bit more real every day, she decided the best thing to do was give up. That was the adult thing to do. That way, nobody in the band would be held back by her family issues. Her mom would get off her case. Asuka's arrogance convinced her there was no other way, so she began to shut everyone out and lock herself away from the idea of performing at nationals. Except, that little taste was just too sweet. Her mind was made up though. This was her choice. This is meant to mirror Mamiko and what she ultimately ended up doing despite loving trombone. As we all know, Mamiko lived to regret this decision by buying into this desire to grow up fast and leave behind selfish childhood fascinations. Asuka was on track to do the same. Kumiko realizes this and sets out to intervene. On the day that Kumiko comes over to visit Asuka at her house, things go down. Kumiko launches her attack, to which Asuka resists and delivers lie after lie, trying to hold her back until she has to be honest just to satisfy her. As she tells her story, we start to see the real Asuka come to life as she recalls the blip of passion that made her want to go to nationals more than anything. She reasons that this roadblock was probably her own fault for being so selfish, inflicted by some sort of god who is watching her. She said so many harsh things, looked to everyone as a means to her own end, and that's why she must be punished for imposing her ideals too much onto others. She still managed to become a burden even when staying out of the affairs of others as much as possible by feeding into a loop of selfishness that she probably would have criticized others for doing. Kumiko seeks to challenge these thoughts by presenting a new way of looking at all of it, though. This selfishness each person has is not a burden to everyone, but instead something that everyone can look up to and admire. Thinking about that piece Asuka is always playing, that expression of her passion, Kumiko felt a warmth and delight from hearing it. Passion is what makes music special. Having friends with ambitions and dreams is what makes them people she wants to be alongside and root for. Reina was this way after all. People should stop buying into the narrative that individual drive is corruptive and start embracing a new one where your own desires matter. This idea goes against so many ideals of a collectivist Japanese culture that it's really admirable to see it in a show like this. The next day, we see Asuka give one last pushback against Kumiko, basically reenacting that one part from my Hibike Vine video. Kumiko has had it with Asuka acting like her ideology is better than everyone else's. She's sick of her arrogance. She wants Asuka to accept her love, dammit! Asuka thinks she knows so much about the world but can't be bothered to hear out any other perspectives. For all her image as a mature person gave her, she is still a kid and should start acting like it. That's not a bad thing at all though. Asuka's version of being an adult is unhappy. It's unfulfilling. A life with no dreams is no life at all. Kumiko puts her cards on the table and admits to her selfish desire to play with her upperclassmen on stage. Now the ball is in Asuka's court to give in to selfishness and do what she wants for once in her life. That love and passion was real. She'll regret it for the rest of her life if she chooses to give it up then and there. Asuka knows Kumiko is right. Sure, she acts strong afterwards, but one detail I love is that if you look closely enough, Asuka's legs are shaking during this scene. Asuka is just so happy to know for sure now, because she had been working hard this entire time to place high in the mock exams so that she could keep playing. When Nationals finally comes and goes, Taki lets her know that her father sent her his regards, and the look in her eyes says it all. Asuka had reached her father. It wasn't so much about the destination as the journey for Asuka, but there was no mistaking that achieving it was the cherry on top. So that takes us to the final scene of the anime, where Kumiko says goodbye to Asuka. The underclassman recalls how much she didn't like her at first, but now that she knows her upperclassman's story, her journey, and has seen her passion, she's grown to love her. Kumiko is sad to let that go. She's sad to say goodbye. It must happen though. So Asuka passes along the piece Hibike Euphonum, and in doing this, she expresses that she wishes for Kumiko to spread that passion that she found through her. So Asuka exits stage left, her journey complete. She doesn't have a single regret left behind. Now she can go through the rest of her life without that burden. Without the only burden that was ever placed on her by anyone. The burden she placed on herself. Did you know that if you compiled every funny Kumiko noise from the series, you would have a full episode's worth of funny noises Tomoyo Kurosawa can produce? This is part of Hibike canon, everyone. It's required viewing. Anyways, I'm sure a lot of you expected Kumiko to top this list, and I have to say she came really close for me. I would not even bat an eye if Kumiko is anyone's favorite character because she easily earns every little bit of praise I could possibly give her. In most series with a large cast, the main character never even comes close to the best of the best, let alone the bronze medal. This makes her an exceptional protagonist in my eyes. It feels like a lot of writers are afraid of making their protagonists a little too interesting. It's a bit understandable, as it's better to put your excellent but more risky ideas onto side characters, because if you lose relatability in your main character, it's going to be an uphill battle to get people invested in your work. Kumiko is amazing because somehow the stars aligned to where we got a character who is not only brilliant by subverting the overly safe protagonist, but is every bit as relatable and sympathetic as we could have ever wanted, if not more so than safe protagonists. I feel like it would have been a disservice to how intentionally human this show is if they phoned in Kumiko, so I think even though there are two characters I like more, I am super proud that they just nailed this one. Everyman is a term often used to describe benign, likable protagonists that sort of follow the plot and give it a push without diverging too much from the general relatability that makes it easy to like them. Kumiko does a lot of this, letting people spew their thoughts about the world at her without getting too attached or involved. However, what ends up happening to Kumiko throughout Hibike is quite mesmerizing and quite a journey for an every woman to take. You see, this series leads the viewer to a false sense of security by imprinting Kumiko as the familiar everywoman, only to slowly make her self-aware. The everywoman starts waking up and starts realizing it's a simulation. The everywoman starts realizing that this safe relatability is not relatable at all, and then suddenly reaches out in a violent burst of energy to break the barriers that were containing her as an apathetic protagonist, and reach for happiness that she was instinctively denying herself. How do we see this development unfold? Best to take it slow. Unlike characters that came before her on the list, there is no shortage of scenes involving Kumiko, so there's plenty to dissect. In the very first scene in the show, we see Kumiko prove to us first and foremost in this flashback with her and Reina that she is one thing easily: apathetic. Gold is gold to her. Dreaming too high was unrealistic, so she might as well be proud. The series is only going to go on to show us how unforgiving this world can be, so why waste time being upset if that's what Hibike's rules demand? Well, that mentality is what started this weird curiosity in Kumiko when she saw Reina crying. Figuring out why Reina would bother being upset over what was to her a good result is the crux of Kumiko's journey and the primary question she would be looking to answer over the course of the series. Even joining band in high school was kind of a whatever decision for her. She was not super hyped up to get back into it, more just doing it because that's where all her friends were going, and it was the only thing she had ever done. Kumiko never intended to take it super seriously and even went to Kitauji just to get a fresh start from that whole stressful version of band life that had been bogging her down before. Much to her surprise, a certain raven-haired girl would make that separation much, much harder to so idly do. See, Kumiko had planned on letting the sight of that crying girl go with the passage of time, not feeling obligated to keep it in her mind, but when Reina shows up at Kitauji for her own reasons, that itch came back and started to bother Kumiko a lot. Kumiko would then come to find out that this whole school coincidentally is packed with band drama. The discourse was so wild, and the whole time Kumiko just wanted to stay on the outside of it all and practice like she had. No need to insert herself into all of it. Just keep her head down and butt out. Don't ask questions about Natsuki, don't place herself on one side of the argument, avoid talking to Reina despite really wanting to clear the air. For the first couple of episodes, one might be surprised just how inactive Kumiko actually is in the plot of the show where she is the main character. At the most, she begrudgingly tries to keep the plot going by doing things like provoking Natsuki into playing with everyone or hearing out always weird rants. I think the turning point for Kumiko that you might not expect from her that ultimately departs her from this everywoman role comes at the end of episode 7. Yes, all throughout the band drama and Aoi quitting, I feel like Kumiko maintains an arm's length distance from actually having any stake in what's going on around her. That's half a show of being a character who exists but is too afraid to get too invested in the people around her. Then Hazuki asks that fateful question, that one that directly attacks Kumiko as a person and forces her to confront an actual decision where others' feelings may be on the line. Are you going out with that there shoe? I like how the episode cuts off right after Kumiko is asked that, like it's a plot twist that someone directly asks something of her, like Hazuki is breaking the reality of space-time by putting her on the spot. Then in the next episode, Kumiko is whisked into a series of events where she really can't stay neutral and apathetic any longer. Kumiko is totally cool letting Hazuki run off with Shu, no problem, but as we discussed much earlier, Shuichi exists for no other reason than to pine for Kumiko. This makes it an issue when Shuichi wants to go to the festival with her, and Hazuki wants to go to the festival with him. So either Kumiko begrudgingly, and I say that because she is so clearly not into it, goes with Shuichi and hurts Hazuki's feelings, or turns him down and hurts Shuichi. This may seem incredibly stupid and petty, which it is, but contextualizing Kumiko being so used to not having to make hard decisions, and suddenly you can see why it causes her so much stress. So, Kumiko resolves this in a spur-of-the-moment, really sloppy way by grabbing the arm of the first person she could, and guess who it is? Reina. In her effort to resolve this as quickly as possible, she accidentally gets involved with the other thing she was trying to entirely avoid confronting. Some people might call this contrivance, but I personally think it's brilliant. It's the meta-narrative of the protagonist trying to maintain her distance from others, but being forced to realize by the universe that running away from everything is not something someone can do. Whether she wants to or not, Kumiko will have to interact with the world around her. Reina likes it when people walk their talk, so she doesn't let Kumiko wiggle out of going to the festival with her easily. Not to mention, having watched this whole thing unfold before her eyes, she probably wanted to hold Kumiko accountable for not being upfront. One thing we're going to learn about Reina is that she's like the anti-Kumiko who will take everything into her own hands if she feels like it's her responsibility. So naturally, it's going to be the beginning of this relationship where we see Kumiko's passive every woman status questioned. One of the most famous scenes in the series is the mountain hike scene between the two of them on the day of the festival. This is where we see Reina and Kumiko bond for the first time and really set both their arcs in motion. One about a girl who needs to be humbled for her ironically immature behavior, and another who could stand to give more damns about the world around her. Kumiko is the latter here, getting utterly called out by Reina for all these things I've been describing. Now Reina is a little eccentric in her phrasing, no doubt about that, but her desire to peel that good girl skin off of Kumiko is better contextualized when we understand exactly what Kumiko went through in the past. The reason Kumiko is the way she is because she pulled the same thing Reina pulled in an audition once and stole a competition spot from an older member in middle school. Her reaction to this was to turtle up and not overstep these boundaries again that hurt others, even if she did nothing wrong. Reina and Kumiko went to the same middle school, so we know the trumpet player witnessed this firsthand. I believe that Reina genuinely sees Kumiko as talented, perhaps even enough to be special like her, but can't fathom why she overly humbles herself for the sake of others. This weird, contradictory behavior is what Reina seeks to understand about this Euphonium player and what draws her to Kumiko. She directly wanted Kumiko's potential as a person to not go squandered, so she takes the girl under her wing and starts pushing and challenging her boundaries. This girl ends up sucking Kumiko in, letting her be amazed by how bold someone can be in a world where there was so much that was going to hurt them or others from such careless selfishness. She questions her place in this world and wonders what it would be like to live like Reina, like she was on her own quest to be special. This point onward, Kumiko can't escape this feeling, this desire to be more like Reina. She tries to ignore it and just take everything casually again, but it becomes hard to think of this hobby of hers as something that she can just be so indifferent to anymore when she looks around and sees others working hard at it too, like Natsuki. If she is indifferent, she is missing the energy of everyone around her, disrespecting it almost. With the encouragement of Reina, she puts her all into the auditions and passes it with flying colors, knocking Natsuki out of the competition. This terrifies Kumiko at first, but when Natsuki and Kumiko talk it out, the older girl laughs at how scared she was to upset her by simply playing better. Natsuki imparts to Kumiko that she well earned her role and did the right thing by giving it her best shot. Through this understanding, Kumiko learns the merit of holding her own talent in higher regard even if it means pushing against the status quo. What Reina had told her had really helped her, so when the raven-haired girl came under fire over the solo, Kumiko knew she suddenly had to do better than being on standby and watching from a safe position. Reina needed her help. Kumiko aligning herself with Reina is something Kumiko at the start of the series would never do. Reina was doing the very thing Kumiko feared most by hurting a lot of people by standing out and being bold with her actions. Kumiko was throwing herself into that fire too by thinking Reina deserved better than the credit she was being given. Kumiko acknowledges how hard it was going to be, but for once, Kumiko was doing what she felt was the right thing as opposed to the safer thing. The nearer the challenge audition comes, the more she has to lean into it too. She's in too far to double back. Yuko tries to pry for Kumiko's feelings, and she stands hard with Reina. Of course, there's the infamous confession of love scene, which, putting aside the holy word of Kumire, is a great moment of resolution for Kumiko in that she resolves to not caring how much it puts her on the outs. She will side with Reina. Even if everyone hates her, she will side with Reina. I think this is more of a Reina scene than a Kumiko scene personally, but I won't deny that it absolutely demonstrates that Kumiko has found things worth putting her reputation on the line for, those being the fairness and justice in the ensemble, as well as a person who values her and has perpetuated her own growth and boldness. I just love her willingness to stand up and clap for Reina when everyone else is too afraid to ruffle feathers. After forging this new bond and undergoing this trial with Reina, we see the effects of it manifest in Kumiko's own pursuits as well. There is a passage that she really begins to struggle with, to the point where her inability to play it is tarnishing the piece. I've had something similar happen to me in some of my chamber experience, so when Taki-sensei says he would rather take Kumiko off the part, I feel the heartbreak of ultimately failing to pull off something even though you worked so hard and put so much practice in. The really significant thing here is that past Kumiko would not have been bothered by this. She would have been happier that the ensemble sounded better for her lack of participation. It doesn't matter, it's all irrelevant, she can't stick out, she should just be content with playing in the ensemble at all. Kumiko finds herself rationalizing these things but can't possibly be content with it. She breaks down, she starts running, and finds that she wants more. She doesn't want to be a footnote, she wants to be on exactly the same level as everyone else who's trying so hard. She wants, more than anything, to improve. Good isn't good, great isn't great, she wants to be special. Umaku naritai, tokubetsu ni naritai. For the first time, she realized that wanting more was so natural. It was stupid to be content with mediocrity when she had the human ability to try harder. She realizes this in this grand signature scene of hers why Reina cried that day. Gone were the days of avoiding making too big of a deal out of something. The pain of failure was too hard to accept lying down. The way Orpheus in the Underworld plays was such a brilliant decision to perfectly capture the calamity and unrest in Kumiko's heart as it breaks down in every possible way. It's like a hymn to the ways she failed on every level to actualize herself sooner and want more out of a precious life that she had been taking for granted for far too long. In Season 2, we see these themes expanded on in a great way. I'll brush over the Nomi and Mizore stuff because it's the kind of Kumiko that we saw earlier in the series. She doesn't want to get too involved, and she sort of nudges the plot along without moving herself too far out of line. Some might wonder if this is a regression considering how firmly she stood with Reina in Season 1, but I think it's actually a little bit more nuanced because Reina was someone who was special to her, and Mizore and Nozomi were much more like strangers, so she thought that watching from afar was just a much better choice, even if she would come to regret it later. Not telling Reina about Taki-sensei's wife can be explained as well in that Kumiko now faced a separate issue of not wanting to hurt Reina. It was one thing when she stayed complacent to avoid hurting random people, but I think not telling Reina was a more conscious choice because now she was important to Kumiko, and hurting a friend was a lot weightier on her mind than hurting someone she was only minorly acquainted with. By this point, Kumiko and Reina have such wonderful chemistry, and the bond they form is caring, sincere, and important to both of them. That makes it all the scarier to say something that might hurt her. Late in the season, we see her have to learn the hard way that she can't spare being passive even with the people she's closest to, though. This is a good growth moment for Kumiko as well, as she readjusts her behavior to be more trusting with her companion and to have a significantly more powerful bond. It wasn't the right decision not to tell Reina, but Kumiko learns her lesson and they become closer for it. Then we have the Asuka stuff, and oh by god do we have the Asuka stuff. This feels like the final boss of Kumiko's willingness to intervene on risky situations. Asuka is so laced with cynicism, has built such an impossible wall to crack, and has been watching Kumiko at every turn. Asuka knows how fake and safe Kumiko plays it, and she is prepared not to let anyone make up some half-ass excuse to try and tell her what the best thing is for her out of some pitiful obligation. When it finally comes time to confront Asuka about what's going on deep down, I fully believe it's no coincidence that Natsuki, Kaori, and Haruka entrusted it to Kumiko. She's not the level 1 peasant trying to avoid battles anymore. She's ranked up her skills considerably, more than capable of tackling the final boss thrust at her in her first year. Asuka puts up a good fight when Kumiko comes to her place. She diverts the conversation a lot, avoids a direct confrontation with her mother, and constantly lies. Asuka pushes Kumiko away from the truth, saying that she just wanted to help her study and that she doesn't hate her mom. The old Kumiko just would have listened and let this go. This Kumiko doesn't though. She keeps up the pressure and Asuka comes clean about her story little by little to try and satisfy her. Kumiko pressing Asuka about hating her mom opens up a little sore spot that Asuka doesn't show others. Kumiko is making progress by not taking her lies sitting down. Kumiko keeps pushing and forcing Asuka to recall these things that gave her passion, much like what happens with Taki, and it's what finally breaks down her psyche and begins to turn the gears about how she really knows what she wants to do to maintain her happiness. We've already talked about the rest of the story with Asuka, but as it pertains to Kumiko, she managed to break through to someone by actively pushing herself onto them, not letting them slide by when she knows that they're hurting inside. All good final bosses have multiple forms though, and this is where that scene in After School Obligado comes around with Asuka really feeling the need to test Kumiko on everything she's learned so far by being around others in concert band. Asuka is savvy to Kumiko's reluctance to push boundaries, having been surrounded by people who never once went out of their way for her. The third year calls out every little thing Kumiko is guilty of, pushing a narrative of the static protagonist who won't stand up for something she believes in when the going gets really tough. Kumiko is not like Asuka though. She hasn't been only superficially attaching herself to others. At least, not anymore. What Kumiko has is a genuine love for everyone now, and a genuine respect and care to see them all grow. That's why she wants Asuka to stay. Kumiko has grown to love Asuka. She has cut through all of her layered fakeness and learned to love the real Asuka. She would convince Asuka to stay even if it meant breaking down, begging, and never backing down no matter how much Asuka tried to prove her genuine feelings wrong. I said I'd come back to the line where Aoi told Kumiko not to have any regrets. Mamiko repeats the same thing earlier in the episode. Kumiko has learned too much from those two to dare risk letting anything slide idly by her again. She's going to fight for her improvement. She's going to fight for her friends. She isn't going to layer her statements with blanketed beliefs about what she assumes the club wants and instead focus on what she personally wants. Kumiko wants to play with Asuka. She knows this. She speaks her mind. In her mind, it is high time Asuka started listening to her own desires too. If someone as apathetic as her can learn that, then she would never accept that someone as strong as Asuka couldn't too. This resolve shakes Asuka to her core and single-handedly brings her back to the ensemble. Granted, Asuka is working on that the whole time, but now she can do so easily, knowing that her presence is one that Kumiko is genuinely willing to fight for. Kumiko isn't going to return to her apathy anymore. She's going to love life to the fullest. She's going to be honest with the people around her. Be there for them. Support them. I didn't want to retread too much by saying too much about Mamiko, but Kumiko knew she had to be the person her sister never could. That's why she breaks down crying on the train that day. Kumiko has such a blessed opportunity to be someone special that not everyone gets the chance to in their youth. So she doesn't want to waste it anymore. When she says goodbye to Asuka at the end of Season 2, that warmth she remembers is the warmth that reached her once cold, unmoving heart, which now beats for the people she loves. An activity she loves. The new Kumiko that she loves being. The last thing I want to talk about with Kumiko is the very last scene in O's finale. I alluded to it in Kanade's entry, but it has finally come time to dissect it. Kumiko asks Kanade how losing made her feel. Kanade responds that it made her so upset that she wanted to die. This is the very same sentiment that Reina expressed all that time ago. Kanade doesn't know yet exactly how that line is going to change her into the best version of herself, but Kumiko does. All she can do is smile and put her head back, knowingly gazing into a bright future that her underclassman was about to embark on the same way that she did. It takes that passion, that feeling of frustration that digs into you and bothers you to act and make a change that makes your whole life better. Throughout the whole movie, Kumiko is trying to teach Kanade this. It's only now she happily takes solace in knowing that she did her job. Even when her time in band is done, she will have passed on the same actualization that will help these confused teenagers grow for generations. And roll credits. If Hibike had no hope for a continuation, I would be content with this. A brilliant concluding bookend for a brilliant character in a brilliant series. If you had to ask me who I relate most to in Hibike nowadays, I would probably say Haruka. But if you asked me who my high school self probably would most relate to, it might be Kumiko, but I would say the more accurate answer would be Mizore. Shy characters are really hard to get right in my opinion. I think they're either a bit romanticized or a bit overdone. Mizore won't be a perfect example of all people who struggle to form social relationships despite really wanting to, but I felt like at the very least she strikes a healthy enough balance between extremes to make her feel like one of the go-to examples of how I'd like to see shy characters portrayed. She's awkward, but not overly so, avoidant but in reasonable ways, and has a personality underneath all of that which is not only believable, but has flaws that help demonstrate why escaping the cyclation is so challenging for her. Outside of that just being the way that she is, we don't really get an explanation why Mizore has asocial tendencies, but honestly, I'm really glad that we don't. It would have been so easy to give her some kind of terrible trauma or make her come from some violent home, but I think it's really refreshing to see a shy character who is just a normal girl because in real life, it's usually not so overdramatic. Sometimes it can be, but I think it's refreshing to see an example of a shy character that doesn't try to border on PTSD. The first point in the timeline for Mizore is when we see Nozomi take her under her wing in middle school. At this point, it's safe to assume that the poor girl had no friends or any clear skills to make them. She's very underdeveloped socially, and this will turn its ugly head very quickly when we see how she navigates her first real friend, maybe ever. I think the psychology of Mizore is important to examine because it will explain why she reacts and thinks about the world like she ends up doing. First of all, Mizore seems to value dispositional factors much higher than situational ones in her head. If something goes wrong, she is likely going to assume that it's because of her and not because of the circumstances that she was in. This is not without logic on her end because we do see tendencies in her that borderline on self-destructive, but it's also illogical when we consider that there's more likely a situational attribute for the issues she faces sometimes. Simply put, Mizore blames her inability to form social connections on herself. This is relevant because we're going to see that when Nozomi makes missteps, Mizore allows the weight of her friend's mistakes to crush her own spirit rather than letting any resentment build up within her. I think this nature of her speaks to how kind and in awe of the world she really is. Mizore often downplays her own skills and strengths because she often feels like she's no comparison to how amazing others seem. When Nozomi makes Mizore her friend, this leads to an imbalanced relationship where Mizore idolizes Nozomi as the perfect person, an image which is just begging to be shattered. Although there might have not been a way around this on her end. After not having friends for so long, the truth is after that initial joy of companionship, it's hard for people to not want to place an absurd amount of expectation and value on someone who just might not be able to live up to it. It happens a lot. It's happened to me on both ends. I think this part of the shy person experience is really yucky, so it's left out of a lot of stories with shy characters learning to socially adjust themselves. I'm glad Hibike portrays it though, and we're going to dive into why it's harmful and how Mizore learns the hard way through it, but eventually grows because she had that experience. In middle school, Mizore's band got silver at a competition and it ended their run and sent everyone into sadness. Mizore says later that she doesn't like competitions, but I don't actually think that that's the deciding incident for that. More on that later. In fact, I personally believe this incident made Mizore more enthusiastic about getting better for competitions than anything, as Nozomi made the promise with her that they would get gold together in high school the next year. As we know, Nozomi's word is gospel to Mizore, and she not only is going to get really good at oboe, but start excelling in ways that go completely off the charts. Let's talk about the healthiness of honing your craft purely for the sake of someone else, because this is a big issue for Mizore, and we're going to see this hold her back all the way through both the series and Liz and the Bluebird. Recognition in the eyes of an observer and self-actualization are two different bars for scaling talent. When you perform your work for the sake of another, you are setting a very clear ceiling that cannot be passed through because you are not able to directly sense or perceive the progress towards the other person's pride in you for working hard. Thus, it can feel unfulfilling and discouraging because it's a factor you can never really know for sure. On the contrary, when you perform and get better for selfish reasons, that ceiling is removed because you can internally feel and track your ego's ascension healthily and instead be encouraged by the progress you are making. One major lesson of Hibike is that it's okay to have a little selfishness, especially if you want to realize yourself and improve at your talents. There is absolutely a such thing as too much, but what makes humans unique and autonomous beings is their sense of individuality, which is why Reina excels in areas Mizore struggles with because she poured her passions towards herself first and others second. The sad fact is the longer she attributes her good qualities to those she performs for, the farther off she is from becoming a healthier and better adjusted person. This is why Nozomi leaving the band was as crippling as it was for Mizore. Nozomi had assumed she had been improving for her own sake the whole time. When that rug was ripped out from underneath the oboist, she instantly lost all meaning and reason to further herself. I think this is where the anti-competition mindset comes in. Mizore had been working so hard for the competition. It must be her fault Nozomi had left her. It must have been because she wasn't good enough for the competition. That's where he arrived to the idea that competitions are frustrating and hurt people. Now, not only has Mizore lost her passion at playing, but she's also engaging in a crippling self-dialogue regarding her inadequacy to maintain social relationships. The way Nozomi could hold on to so many friends while she failed to maintain even one made Mizore question her dispositions within her that create these challenges. She's gloomy, she isn't charismatic, and she was an outcast from society, and rightfully so. Being given the hope of Nozomi only to have it crushed and squandered has made her terrified of further rejection when she hypothetically inflicts further burdensome feelings onto other people. Yuko then steps in to inflict some much-needed sense into the girl that she can't assume the rest of the world is so far beyond her that she has no ability to connect with it. Mizore was happy when she advanced in the competition, right? That means she has the ability to feel pride even without Nozomi. She has the ability to bond with others without Nozomi. She's had that ability inside her all this time, and this is the point where she realizes it. Afterwards, she decides to use this burst of confidence after a wonderful shot of being pulled back into the light to talk things through with Nozomi and get them back on track for a friendship. A lot of people don't like the Mizore and Nozomi drama in Season 2, either because they feel like it's overdramatic or it doesn't solve all of Mizore's issues at the end of the day just by reintroducing the crutch she had been relying on. I agree with the second point to an extent, but not so much the first. I think a lot of people passing judgment on Mizore about how she should have just talked it out haven't lived through the mental barriers she had placed on herself that prevented her from doing that. She physically could not talk it out with Nozomi. That's what having social anxiety means. I wish more people understood this isn't like a rom-com where the two halves of this perfectly healthy couple could have communicated and prevented the conflict. Mizore has a serious condition that apprehends her from doing it even if she wanted to. That makes a world of difference and shows how human she is. As for her just going back to how she was before by playing solely for Nozomi, well, I think that would have been an issue had that been the end of her arc. Reina even saying the opposing thing to Kumiko that she would play for herself is somewhat of a foreshadowing of things to come. Which also doubles as a cool callback moment later that demonstrates Reina's growth when she says she'll play for Kumiko, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyways, look no further than Liz and the Bluebird to properly finish this arc that Hibike began for Mizore. If you felt like something was lacking from Mizore in the show, this movie will be the perfect aha moment to make it all come together. I explained the Bluebird metaphor already in Nozomi's entry, but to restate, Mizore thinks she is closer to Liz at the start of the movie, but her role is actually more that of the Bluebird. The Bluebird is constantly limiting herself by fixating on Liz and being insecure about separation. While Liz wants to hold on to the Bluebird tight, the Bluebird needs to stop squandering her potential and set her sights to a sky higher than Liz can fly. At the beginning of the movie, we see that Mizore is still as dependent as she ever was on Nozomi, denying herself to grow past the ceiling that she set because she has no goals past her companion's approval. Even though Ririka is trying to get close to her upperclassmen, Mizore is clearly uninterested. She definitely heard Yuko's words at that time, but hasn't grown enough yet to apply them to her life. She is content living as she always has with Nozomi, seeing no need to search for something more when that happiness can just be maintained with her. This is why she's very clingy and very resistant to change. It's clear to so many other characters in the film that it just seems like a waste to not want to do anything with the gifts that you have. Ririka, Niyama-sensei, Yuko, Natsuki, Reina, they all see that Mizore could be making herself happier than she is if she didn't need to ask for Nozomi's permission to do so. It's a great thing that Nozomi and Mizore are so close again, but the reason why Mizore needs to change is because this kind of relationship won't bring her happiness forever. Something like the schism is bound to happen again, and Mizore will be right back to square one without any support system or self-confidence to fall back on. It's great that Mizore gets great relief from Nozomi, but something Liz and the Bluebird hammers in is that Nozomi isn't going to fix Mizore and make her the person who can sustain happiness for the rest of her life. At some point, Mizore herself is going to have to be the one to make that change and try to find happiness with her own two hands, otherwise she's never going to improve. Granted, this isn't to say that Nozomi can't be important to Mizore, she just can't be her entire life. Nozomi needs to accept this, but Mizore does as well. What's a great start is Mizore already learned from Yuko in Season 2 that she gets satisfaction from things besides pleasing Nozomi. One issue she has, though, is being able to act and reach out for those external satisfactions, though, which comes from her belief in her ability to do so. Take, for example, the blowfish she begins to feed in the science classroom. She does this all on her own, but still asks Nozomi to come with her to do it as if her presence will make the activities suddenly more fulfilling. She is pursuing a hobby but can't find the reason to believe it wouldn't be better without Nozomi around. Enter Ririka. We've already talked about Ririka, we all love Ririka. But what does Ririka's presence do to affect the way Mizore views her life? As time goes on and we see her push her way in little by little, Mizore starts to let her guard down until we see the moment I talk about in Ririka's section, where Mizore sees her break down and notices how genuine and pure her admiration really is. Without realizing, the second person managed to take interest in Mizore, and it was difficult for her to deny by the point of her breaking down in tears that it wasn't out of mere pity. This opens her up to the need to do something for her, and by inviting her to the pool, this changes Mizore's entire social swing. It was a small thing, one that she was plenty capable of, but the positive response from her underclassmen showed her that this time, she managed to do right and make someone's life better. This is huge because it breaks down that distorted thought that she would never be able to make more friends because of how awkward and gloomy she was. Suddenly, with this new companion in her life, it starts to seem a lot more realistic to her that she could make more friends entirely independent of Nozomi. Mizore was growing, and realizing she was growing. So just imagine what went through Mizore's mind when Reina Kosaka, the protege of the ensemble, told her that her playing was caged by lowering herself to Nozomi's level. It becomes so much clearer now that her growth is accelerating to a point where she is becoming consciously aware of it, and that the oboist might be able to see where Reina is coming from. She doesn't want to admit it out loud, but Mizore internally knows now that the reason the solo is not working is because she and Nozomi are not at the same skill level musically. But she was still too afraid to leave her only friend behind. If she really left Nozomi behind, then she would have to say goodbye to her forever. Except no matter how she felt about it, the Bluebird still had to leave Liz behind. After talking it out with Niyama-sensei, we see the glint in Mizore's eyes when she finally begins to see the big blue sky in front of her. We feel the way Mizore suddenly wants to take flight, only held back by the loneliness that will fill her without someone she loves beside her. Both Mizore and Nozomi understand the message of the storybook though. The Bluebird still leaves because it's the best thing for her, no matter how sorrowful the farewell. That is why both of them have to act in the proper way. Nozomi to let Mizore go, and for Mizore to take flight. So, without the support or help from Nozomi, Mizore finds her own happiness and lets her solo soar. Mizore has grown past the need for Nozomi to function. She was learning how to function and find happiness on her own. After proving herself, the effects of the departure still hit Nozomi far too hard. Mizore goes to comfort her and promises her that the love she held for her will never go away, even if she doesn't need her for every little thing anymore. It's okay for two friends to have different paths in life. It's okay for them to grow apart. That will never change the time they spent together, though. With this mutual understanding in mind, the two promise to keep working hard on their own weaknesses. Nozomi to grow and support Mizore properly as her own person, and Mizore not to neglect the greatness in herself for the sake of anyone. This mutual understanding makes them joint. Their relationship becomes healthier and more meaningful than it ever was despite departing on their own paths. In fact, Mizore is already more expressive and free-thinking, throwing in that silly little happy ice cream joke that she never would have made before. And of course, the shocked Pikachu face. Now, how do I talk about this shot? The last shot of one of the best things KyoAni has ever made. Well, I think it's good to clarify first, it's not so much what Nozomi says to Mizore. The real thing about this scene to look for is the way whatever Nozomi says makes Mizore feel. Mizore was such a doubtful person throughout Hibike. She was always so stoic or dismissive of most comments or assertions about certain truths, continuing to read between lines that weren't there. The fact that she's so surprised, so mind-blown to a degree of whimsy, whatever Nozomi proclaimed, Mizore was stricken with surprise because of her newfound trust in her words. The reason it's so surprising to her is because she believes that it's true. The Bluebird has now appreciated how beautiful it is to see the world for what it is, rather than the tiny cage she constructed to be her world before. It's been a long road to get here, but we made it. If you've been keeping track of who I've mentioned so far in this video, you will know there can only be one character left who could be sitting at the top of this list. This character is not just my favorite character in Hibike Euphonium, but perhaps my favorite anime character ever. That character is, of course, Knuckle. Duh. The way this derp leaves a mallet behind on competition day, that's the most true-to-life percussion thing ever written. 10 out of 10 character. Although Reina I think is pretty good too, if not a little bit better than him. Goodness. Words leave me when trying to say something that does this character justice. I feel like so few characters just have it all like she does. An incredible arc, a really sad but not overdone backstory, great dialogue and acting, great interactions with a variety of characters, believable flaws, a likable personality, out-of-this-world character animation, and she does all of this while being a refreshing take on a character archetype that could have so easily been horrible. It's perfectly okay if you don't feel the same, but she's consistently remained outstanding to me after several watch-throughs of Hibike over so many years. I think the best place to start with her is to contextualize exactly what kind of character I was afraid she was going to be when I first saw her. Have you ever read Looking for Alaska or Paper Towns? I don't like the female leads of these books very much. Both of them, in my opinion, are the most insufferable, idealized teenage novel garbage I've ever seen put to pages. I adore John Green as a philanthropist and an educator, and he is by all means a good writer, but I just cannot get behind these two specific characters in these two specific books of his. If you like them, I'm super glad and happy for you. But to me, these girls are portrayed to be so mysterious and deep and incomprehensible, when in reality they're the most selfish, fake, toxic, and entitled people to all the other characters in the story, and they mostly get away with it. I'm not going to talk too much about them, I don't really care that much. I just want to use them more as a means of explaining why Reina actually manages to subvert this trope in a way that doubles her back from being a character I would hate with every fiber of my being, to one I adore so much. Here's the key difference between Reina and those girls. Reina isn't intended to be seen as some galaxy-brained, mature teenager who deserves to be hailed for other people not understanding her because it's their fault that they don't get her. In fact, she is ironically enough one of the most immature characters in the entire show. Hibike Euphonium knows this. It doesn't ignore it. It makes it clear as day that her ideals are warped beyond all belief by a really lonely childhood, and pushes her to swallow her pride and realizes that the issue isn't always everyone else, the issue is her sometimes. In Kumiko's entry, I alluded there was more going on with Reina than I let on. The fact still stands that Kumiko is far too apathetic for her own good, unlike Reina. However, there is a such thing as too ambitious and too self-serving in terms of thoughts and actions that one takes when they engage with the world. That is not to say Reina is without reason for developing these thoughts. The flashback in Season 2 demonstrates to us that she had a hard time connecting to other people as a child due to her insane talents in the arts, to the point where other children were discouraged from even trying to keep up with her and were rejecting her as a result. No matter what the context of the scene is in Hibike, Reina always gives off this aura of loneliness. It constantly follows her around. Now, when society outs someone, there are two conclusions that can be drawn from that. Either you're the problem, or everyone else is. We saw what happened with Mizore when she took it the former way, but Reina takes it in the complete opposite. There's no particular reason why Reina errs on the side of arrogance, it's just how her personality works. It's no different than how Mizore has led her to err on the side of self-deprecation. As a result, we can see that Reina develops a severe distaste for people her age. She was not accepted by them, so in order to keep herself from falling into a Mizore-like depression, she has to activate her belief in her abilities as a musician, and that's the reason that nobody else appreciates them or her, is because she's just that much more mature than the rest of them. The unfortunate thing about this is Reina's actually not more mature than anyone else her age, despite her overfixation that she is. If anything, she's actually less mature than them. When we see how she handles her first year at Kitauji, it becomes beyond obvious that Reina is deluding herself that she can capture what her idea of maturity and specialness is, without factoring in just how childish she's acting about, well, all of it. Pointing out some random temple to assert how much she likes its maturity shows how much she superfluously self-gratifies herself. Buying outfits for the express purpose of making herself look more mature gives off a sense of shallowness. Climbing a mountain in heels and priding herself on hurting her feet shows how reckless she is. Pining after the teacher because he's so mature and cool demonstrates that she's underdeveloped socially to the point where she can't distinguish between puppy love and real love. The utter lack of regard to hear out or empathize with Yuko or Kaori shows us that she is disagreeable. I could go on, but I think my point has been made. Reina is an immature person wearing the mask of a mature one. The series knows this and demonstrates this to us through not only Kumiko's reactions to her absurd thoughts and feelings about the world, but the direction her arc takes to move away from these delusions and pull her back to a world where she can look for the things that were denied to her in her youth now that she's made aware of them. I've said many times by now that Hibike well establishes that a little selfishness is important, but Reina is used as a clever measuring stick to show just how far you can go with selfishness until it starts becoming unhealthy. Reina states firmly during the hill hike that she thinks she can get away without forming social relationships and has given up on them entirely. Her quest to be special is to prove that she does not need the gratification of fitting in with every other person around her seamlessly and can live beautifully without them. The thing is, that's just not how humans work. Humans are and always will be social creatures. Her insistent refusal to give others a chance is only perpetuating her internalized loneliness, hindering her development and causing her to be destructive to herself and those around her. This is only going to lead to more people rejecting her, more loneliness, and more of the harsh cycle repeating over and over again. The only thing that can end it for Reina is some form of acceptance, someone to come in and legitimately try to understand her and validate her own existence just a little bit. This is where her crush on Taki-sensei comes in, and oh boy, have I seen some really, really awful takes about this plot device. Hibike does not romanticize her fascination with him. I cannot stress this enough. The show goes out of its way to show how all the adults are normal, mature human beings who understand what's going on with her and act exactly the way you would expect them to. Hashimoto laughs it off and waves off the whole thing because she's a silly kid. Taki himself treats her like a totally normal, if rather childish student of his, and also waves off her goofy confession without even a half-second thought because that's what normal adults do around minors. The reason Reina loves Taki-sensei so much is not because she has an actual understanding of him as a person and genuinely thinks he's someone who could better her life. She likes him because he was the one person in her life to show her any hint of kindness and gave her this small little feeling of validation that she had been searching for. However, he still maintains that gap between them as both an adult and a teacher to a minor and a student, which is honest to God the most normal and respectable thing in the universe for a responsible, honest grown-up. However, this leaves Reina unfulfilled, always desiring more than she can get from this man she imprinted on because nobody else gave her the same kindness or regard that he did. This leaves her with nothing but a fantastical, childish dream that will only ever serve to disappoint her. So what can fill that hole in Reina's heart then? You probably have a pretty good idea. The way I've been describing Reina, you might think she comes off as insufferable, but that's honestly not the truth. Reina is all these immature things on top of her being super sympathetic. The fact is, there are so many admirable, likable things about Reina as there are realistic flaws, and that's what makes her so compelling. The fact is, other people have let Reina down. They're not nice to her, they oust her, they sell her short. It takes a really strong person to save face during all that. She also makes an effort to never talk when she can't walk either. She works super hard to become special because she wants to create her own happiness in a world where she was given none by others. It's so admirable for her to pursue her dream, not settle for the status quo, and fight for greater meaning in her own life. As we've seen with Kumiko, Mizore, and Kaori, that is something Hibike is a huge advocate for. The problem is that Reina needs to learn somehow that it's a little of column A and a little of column B that makes someone function and self-actualize in a society where being socially connected to others is not only important, but essential. This is why Kumiko is the perfect person to enter Reina's life at the exact right time to Reina her back in. Wow, that was really bad, I'm sorry. Anyways, I've made it no secret that I really love these two as a duo. Not only are their interactions incredibly fun and charming, but their weaknesses are each other's strengths. In Kumiko's entry, I talked about how she adopted some of Reina's boldness. Reina, though, ends up learning some humility through Kumiko. During the auditions, Reina was public enemy number 1. This was wrongly so, but the way she reacted with hostility only fueled the fire and made her someone easier to target and socially oust. This didn't cause Reina distress on the surface, but it did bring her to the point of screaming outside of the classroom, professing her hatred to those who don't even try to understand her. Keep in mind she was not trying to understand them either, so the street was closed on both ends. The thing that helps Kumiko break into Reina's defenses just a little bit is that Kumiko does see things from Reina's perspective. She was a victim of the same thing in middle school. Kumiko does the bold thing and firmly supports Reina during this time, which gives the trumpet player some validation she would have otherwise never gotten. It's through this compassion and unconditional support that Reina begins to understand a little bit more about what it means to care for someone and helps adjust her to what real human relationships are like after being denied that for so many years. This begins to help her mellow out and start seeing the solo audition for what it is and less of the witch hunt that she imagined it to be. I really like that scene where Kumiko finds Reina on the roof and she admits how considerate Kaori was about the whole situation, even going to eat lunch with her afterwards. Having Kumiko on her side, I believe, broke down that wall she had preventing her from listening and allowed her to respect Kaori's own desire to fight for what she wants as well, understanding why her emotions were so strong about it. Regardless of which way it went, they were a team in the same band, and hostility would only hold everyone back. This is where Reina begins to end up doubting not just her outbursts, but soon her entire philosophy as she begins to realize how muddy and gray the situation truly is. She still wanted to do her best and to play the solo, but she realized then that it would come at the cost on stomping on another's feelings. Before, she never acknowledged this because she only saw everyone as an enemy, but now we can see with her rapidly expanding empathy that people were going to get hurt in her quest to climb to the top. That knowledge actually causes her great distress, and soon she realizes why Kumiko would rather avoid it all to begin with. Yuko's plea for her to throw is another rock that got thrown at her fragile window. Of course, Reina stays realistic and doesn't concede, but she realized then just how valid the feelings are of those who were against her. This keeps festering in her mind until we get to what I feel like is Reina's defining scene. Yeah, I don't think it's the hill scene. I actually think it's the scene that comes right before the audition where Reina finally cracks. She cannot hold in this doubt a second longer, and her weakness and pseudo-self-confidence shatters right in front of Kumiko's eyes. This scene is hands down my favorite in the entire series. It solidifies Reina as my favorite character. The way we see all the subtle things that let us know how vulnerable and lonely she was under her guise of confidence come right to the surface are on the first person she chose to show her weaknesses to is executed flawlessly. She asks Kumiko if she'll still truly be around regardless of what happens. Kumiko affirms that of course she will. Reina pushes back a bit, knowing how many people are rooting for Kaori to win, how many people will see Reina as the villain in this situation. She wants to know if Kumiko will be among them or with her. Reina is crumbling in place as she realizes that hurting people was never something she wanted to do. She just wanted to become special for her own personal self-actualization. This is not truly what she asked for or wanted. Kumiko tells her, though, that she'll still have her as her co-villain regardless of what happens. Even if everyone might be hurt as a result, it does not change that Reina is still better. Reina is still right for taking what should justly be hers. It is great to see how complex the situation is, how she can acknowledge the feelings of others, but it doesn't have to stop her from playing with all her heart because it's still the right thing to do in this situation. If nothing else, there will always be one person who has validated Reina's quest. That one person who will never turn her back on her. I love how this scene plays out, Reina pushing deeper and deeper at Kumiko to make sure she's serious about that, showing how hard it is for her to accept that someone has come to take her side for once. When Kumiko repeats the confession of love line to her, though, the glimmer in the trumpet player's iris says the sincerity of her words has finally reached her. Having heard that, deep in her heart, she could guarantee Kumiko would do the things she said because of the mutual trust they built. Reina could trust that she would have Kumiko even if the whole world rejected her. So with that knowledge in mind, there was no longer any reason to be afraid of what was to come. She marches off and plays the audition of her life. Her face when she sees Kumiko to rise up and clap for her when no one else would just brings such warmth to my heart. That lonely girl was not so alone anymore. The rest of the series shows Reina was never truly the same after that. That mysterious looking for paper towns personality is gone. Now there is a much more human person we see constantly interacting with the world in a more genuine and healthy way. It's not always big things, but a lot of small, little things that all add up. For one, we see Reina hanging out more with Hazuki and Midori, more open to forming close relationships with other people who are making the effort to understand her. She also apologizes to Kaori for acting smug about the audition without paying her feelings proper regard. We see her change her language from "I'm going to be special" to "we are going to be special." She loses a bit of her confidence in her overly mature behavior and starts to act more her age. She says she'll play for Kumiko after saying she'll only ever play for herself in a scene prior, acknowledging that she feels liberated because of the ways that her companion's support helped her grow and wants to pay her tribute. She starts to confront and reason out the distorted beliefs about Taki-sensei, seeing him as less of a god and more of a human man who does things for the sake of those he loves. Hell, by the end of the season, she even confronts that little crush of hers, realizes how irrational it is, and after embarrassing herself hard in front of her section, she finally lets it go. In O's finale, she comes off as more hostile and irritated when people remind her of Taki-sensei, which suggests to me she realized how silly it all was by this point. All of these changes happen, though, without her letting go of the ideals that were truly important. Reina still believes in aiming high, overcoming hardship for something greater than the status quo, and to never lose persistence when something matters. This just makes her so gosh darn lovable. She is a person who has remembered to hold on to the best parts of herself while changing her behaviors that she realizes are flawed. I think the best culmination of this is actually probably not where you would expect to find it. In Liz and the Bluebird of all places. Yeah, I love how Reina is the one to find Mizore and tell her not to hold herself back. She didn't have to say anything or do anything for Mizore, but she does anyways, sympathizing with this other girl who's afraid of being alone too, albeit in a very different way. Reina's assertion to Mizore that she doesn't have to worry about leaving people behind by self-actualizing herself really shows a lot of growth and maturity to look to this peer with growing empathy and let her know that she's been there before, and it's going to be okay. Go be special. You'll never live to regret it. I can't wait to see more of Reina. I think she's absolutely brilliant every second she's on screen. I could not have hit every little thing about her that I adore. Every subtly placed bit of animation and dialogue that I just think keeps building on such a complex character when I don't think that they can do it anymore. But I sure think I tried. Not only is Reina going to become special, but she's already done so in my heart. This is just stellar character writing that I'll always think back on and remember fondly. The way she plays, the value she holds, the way she changes, and the journey she goes on are truly unlike anything I had ever seen before. She is, without a question, my favorite character and my favorite anime ever. Well, we're finally done. Nearly 40,000 words of Hibike analysis. I am absolutely horrified how much I managed to write, and I still feel like this is an oversimplification of all these characters. Hibike's just that good a show, though. I don't know how anything like this ever came to be. I don't know if there will be anything like it ever again in my eyes. I feel like I could somehow go even deeper into every scene in this show if I wanted to, and just look at all the little nuances in it. It is so far from the only work of fiction that you could go really deep into talking about. Even in KyoAni, they have a bunch of shows where there's just so much nuance to them, like Hyoka, Chinibyo, Violet Evergarden. All of these are great and have a lot of nuances that I could dissect in and out, but you have to understand when I'm making a 3-hour video, I have to have a lot of motivation to see it all the way to the end. I think that's just how much the show speaks to me as a huge music nerd who is way too nostalgic for those 9-to-5 Saturday practices on that blazing football field. I think everyone just has that one comfort show, and this is mine. I just never get tired of it. Anyways, I can't thank you enough if you stuck around this long, because I sure know how to ramble all the way from Shuichi to Reina. Seriously, if you're here, go to the comments and write Tokubetsu ni Natta, because you are special. You've earned that one. Anyways, these interpretations are entirely my own. I would not be surprised to meet people who don't agree with parts or entirety of how I look at some of these characters, but I totally welcome that. Like, I know there's some Shuichi fan probably foaming at the mouth at me right now, and I just want to say I'm sorry. I legitimately want to talk to you and be your friend. I just... I'm sorry. I think the range of different interpretations people can have with this show just speaks to how well made it is. Like, it's just like concert music itself. It can mean so many things to so many different people. This might not be a perfect analysis. I am sure that I have missed something even after combing through these episodes so many times to catch so many details. But I think the most important thing is I got to share my love for these characters and sincerely mean something to me. And you all listened, and I can't thank you enough for that. Lord knows, there's no shortage of love that went into this passion project. Sincerely, thank you for sticking around this long. Alright, that's a wrap, everyone. Let's go home. Thank you for listening.